election. And the great electoral asset for you has been Ken Livingstone, who you kicked out of the Labour Party.
Well, Tony Blair has been mentioned quite a lot in the campaign, and so too
in the election literature?
Well, so too a very large number of cabinet members who have been regular visitors down in Brent. I've been down there, so there's been a lot of government members.
I'll try one more time. In the election literature, has there been much mention of Tony Blair?
The Prime Minister appears in a great deal of literature, and not only produced by us. Now, the key issue is Ken Livingstone, and you rightly highlight the fact that he is a popular person in Brent. He was the Member of Parliament there. And I think he's played a very positive role in supporting Robert, who, our candidate, who he's known for many years and says quite rightly is an absolutely excellent, trustworthy person who will deliver for the people of Brent. And that's a judgment by someone who knows Brent.
You don't just feel a tinsy bit uncomfortable that you have to rely on Ken Livingstone to help you win in a very, very safe Labour seat when you've kicked him out of the party?
No, I've worked very closely with Ken over the last 3 years since he was elected as mayor, because I was Minister of London initially, and I've been Minister responsible for resilience in London, which has meant working very closely with the mayor, and we get on very well, we cooperate. He's played a very responsible role, and I'm perfectly happy and very pleased indeed to have his support.
I think your majority was just a shade over 13,000 at the general election.
Yeah.
Surely you can't possibly lose the seat.
Well, in a situation where a government has been under very, very considerable pressure over the last few months, you would expect in the kind of circumstances that you were describing back in the Thatcher era or in the even more distant past than that, the government would be automatically expected to lose and the principal opposition party would be expected to win. So it's not surprising if we're facing some difficulties here, but I have to tell you, the party that's facing the real difficulties tonight is the Conservative Party. If they can't win a by-election when the government is facing the difficulties that it's facing, it doesn't say much for Ian Duncan Smith.
Forgive me if I focus on the problems that the Labour Party are having when I'm talking to you. The problems are intense, that you had a 13,000 majority 2 years ago, and now you're going to lose a seat that has been rock solid forever, for as long as anyone can remember.
Well, firstly, I'd rather wait till the decision was announced rather than proclaim it in advance. But what I would say is that in history we've seen governments mid-term, unpopular, having difficulties, losing by-elections hand over fist. This government hasn't lost a by-election since it was elected in 1997. That is a remarkable record. It's a record that will come to an end at someday. Whether it is tonight or another occasion, I don't know. But it's still a remarkable record and indicates just what the government has been doing and the support it's commanded from the British people.
Ed Davey, is it great enthusiasm for the Liberal Democrats that is pushing up your vote, or is it just apathy with Labour feeling that they didn't want the war in Iraq, their supporters didn't want the war in Iraq, they feel that the whole Hutton thing has taken its toll as well of trust in the government, and then actually there's no great enthusiasm for you?
Well, they're coming to us and not the Conservatives, so people are making a choice to put their cross against the Liberal Democrat candidate. So that suggests that they're going for us and don't like what Ian Duncan Smith is doing with the Conservative Party. I actually think Nick Raynsford was right earlier. I think the Conservative Party are in real trouble tonight. If they come third in this seat, when, as you pointed out, back in 1987 they were within 1,500 votes of taking this seat, this is an absolute disaster. And just as Tony Blair didn't feature on the Labour literature, Ian Duncan Smith was absolutely invisible in this campaign.
You've both had a good pop at the Tory party. Yes. I think Theresa May. It's pretty serious, though, isn't it?
No, as I've already said, this is not natural Conservative territory. The real story that I think we're going to see tonight is of people wanting to give a message to the Labour Party, wanting to give a message to the Labour Party about the fact that they don't trust them, that they don't believe a word Tony Blair says anymore. But it's essentially a left-wing vote, and they have looked for another party on the left. And if they've gone to the Liberal Democrats, it's because they're positioned themselves on the left.
OK, for the moment, thanks a lot. Let's go live now to the constituency itself. We can cross to our political correspondent, Reeta Chakrabarti, who's in Brent Town Hall. Reeta, how's it going?
Well, you can see the frenzy of activity behind me. Lots of boxes are in, but still many more to come in. I can tell you that the atmosphere amongst the Liberal Democrat camp here is very buoyant indeed. They really do seem to think that they might well have swung this election and very possibly won this seat. Well, If that is true, it would of course be a massive victory for them. They need over 26% as a swing to get this, so it really would be a tremendous victory. Labour are being very cautious. They're saying at the moment they feel it's too close to call. They're pointing out many more boxes have yet to come in. Some of those boxes are from very solidly Labour areas.
Reeta,
The Conservatives...
Reeta, just in a word, do we know what turnout is yet?
We don't have any official figure on turnout, John. The parties between them think it's roughly between 30 and 35%. That,
okay,
broadly speaking, is sort of encouraging for Labour.
OK, Reeta Chakrabarti, thanks. We'll be back to you later. Now we must pause for the weather and Alex Deakin.
Thank you very much. It's Eusebio kicking off. Good early ball to Jon Sopel. Crosses it to Carlos Alberto. Neat touch by the Brazilian. Punts it away downfield. This is Emil Heskey. Crosses to Eddie Newton. The crowd beginning to rise now. Alba Johansson, typically fleet of foot, the South African. Laurie Cunningham on the drive to Thierry Henry. The Matador's pirouette. Can he score? Henry scores for Arsenal!
BBC4 celebrates 100 years of Black British football. Black Flash, Sunday at 7.
The result of the first parliamentary by-election for 19 months is due shortly. We're live in Brent East in London to bring it to you as it happens. 3 US troops killed and 2 injured in an attack in northern Iraq this evening. And gone with the wind, Hurricane Isabel batters America's east coast. 7 states declare an emergency. At the Hutton inquiry, Andrew Gilligan denies doctoring his computer notes. And Sussex win the county championship for the first time in their 113-year history. Good evening, this is BBC News 24 with Jon Sopel. Well, polling has closed in a by-election in the traditional Labour stronghold of Brent East, the first since Labour were re-elected in 2001. The votes are being counted to see who will represent the North London constituency following the death of the MP Paul Daisley. We can cross now live to our political correspondent Reeta Chakrabarti, who's at Brent Town Hall. Reeta, how far are we away from a result, do you think?
Well, the expected declaration time was about 1 o'clock. The counters are just coming towards the end of the first stage of the count, but there's no indication yet as to exactly when there will be a declaration. What I can say, John, is that there are some very, very confident Liberal Democrats here. They really think that they have a real chance here to win this seat. If they do take it, it will be an absolutely massive victory for them because they need a huge swing, nearly over 26%. Now that really would be very, very good for them indeed. They are fairly confident. I must say that Labour are looking a little bit gloomy in their corner, and certainly the other whispers that one's getting is certainly of a very, very good Liberal Democrat result here. But as I say, we still have some time to wait for anything official.
Reeta, you've mentioned Labour, you've mentioned the Liberal Democrats, you haven't mentioned the Conservatives yet, who came second in this seat at the general election.
Well, if what I've said holds, and we are seeing a very strong Liberal Democrat performance here, then that will mean that the Conservatives have been pushed into third place. They came second last time, possibly third place for them this time. Now, they say, look, this is not a seat where they would ever expect to do remotely well. It's very strong Labour territory. There's been a lot of anti-war sentiment here, and they wouldn't benefit from that, having supported the government in the war. Having said all that, though, with a government at the moment in the middle of mid-term blues, with so many questions surrounding Tony Blair about trust, about the direction in which he's taking public services, any strong opposition would hope for a good showing in a by-election, and if they do come third in this by-election, that will be very bad news for them.
Reeta, we're using the word if the whole time, so this is all hypothetical, but if you're right, is this because of huge enthusiasm for the Liberal Democrats as a party or disaffection with the governing party?
Well, that is very difficult to say. I mean, to a certain extent, the Liberal Democrats don't really have much of a track record in Brent East. They don't have any councillors in this area, and the opposition, Labour and the Tories, are saying that they don't really have much of a power base here. So that would suggest that, in fact, this is about disaffection with Labour. Now, we don't have any official figures about turnout yet, but the unofficial ones that we're getting from the parties suggest a turnout of roughly 30 to 35%. Now, if that's correct, it's slightly contradictory, because it suggests that Labour has managed to get its vote out. If it manages to get its vote out and yet still loses the seat, well, I mean, I think it does really talk about great disaffection with Labour. Again, all of this is clarified with a big if.
OK, Reeta Chakrabarti, we'll be back with you later, because there's going to be a BBC News special here on News 24 and on BBC One to cover the result of the by-election. That will be from about 12:25. There'll be a special programme that will go through until the result is declared. As Reeta was saying there, we're hoping for a result around 1 o'clock, but you never know with by-elections if there are recounts and contested ballot papers. 3 American soldiers have been killed and 2 others wounded in an ambush near Saddam, i.e. the longest period there's been without a by-election since about 1832, people are saying, or since before the Reform Act. Let's go live there now, and we can see the pictures of what's going on at the scene. The count, well, I don't think we can see people counting. As you can imagine, you've got all the colour there of a by-election with all the, shall we say, fringe candidates there. Apparently it's making it more difficult, but now let's go to sport with Andrew Cotter.
Hello again.
Hello and welcome to viewers on BBC One. I'm Jon Sopel, and this is a BBC News 24 special covering the Brent by-election. This is the scene now live at Brent Town Hall in North East London, where counting is well underway. Polling closed at 10 o'clock this evening, and barring recounts, you can never bar those for certain, we're expecting the results sometime in the next hour. Brent was, of course, the political power base of the former MP Ken Livingstone, now London's mayor, who's been hitting the streets campaigning for the Labour candidate in recent days. Brent has been Labour for as long as anyone can remember, but the Liberal Democrats have been pouring workers into the constituency in the hope of springing one of their famous upsets. Now, were Labour to lose, and I stress we know nothing yet, it will be their first by-election loss in some 15 years. So there's a lot at stake. Well, we have a panel here of Westminster's finest from all the 3 main parties, and we'll be talking to them at length, I should imagine, as we wait for that result to come. But first, let's go to the constituency itself. Reeta Chakrabarti, our correspondent, is at the count. Reeta, do we know how far away we are from getting a result?
I'm afraid we don't, John, no. I mean, counting is well underway now. The probable time of a declaration was always going to be 1 o'clock. But the Liberal Democrats have been saying that if this vote is very close, that they are all prepared for a recount. And at the moment, all the indications are that that vote is very close, with very possibly a Liberal Democrat win. Now, that would be an absolutely huge result for the Liberal Democrats and a really big loss for Labour. Well, I'm joined now by the Labour MP for Poplar and Canning Town, Jim Fitzpatrick. Mr. Fitzpatrick, you are looking defeat in the face. We don't know yet, but it doesn't look good for you. This is potentially a huge upset.
Well, if it is a defeat for the government, it will be an upset, because it will be the first by-election defeat for the Labour Party for 20 years, but the first by-election defeat in 6 years. But the votes haven't been counted yet, so we're not quite at that position. We believe that we've fought a very positive campaign here on the issues we believe mattered to the people of Brent East, which were antisocial behaviour, which were mortgage rates, jobs, policing, the new community health hospital. So from our point of view, we fought a positive campaign, and we await the outcome of the people of Brent, which will be due within the next hour or so.
Well, if you have lost here, and at the moment, of course, it still is a big if, but if you have lost, that is a slap in the face for the government, isn't it? Because it will have been national issues, very probably, that will have decided it.
Well, I think it certainly will send a message to the government, whatever. The fact that it's a lower turnout means that most people haven't participated, which is always a poor thing for politicians to admit that the electoral process is not catching the imagination. The fact that there were 16 candidates in the field and the lower turnout means that these things are generally a lottery. The Liberal Democrats have got very good track record in by-election experience. Incumbent parties have also got a very good track record of winning back seats. So if we do lose, we'll be obviously looking to fight and to win it back at the general. But we're not at that stage yet. We're hoping that the voters of Brent have confidence in us. We believe we've delivered for them, just as we're delivering across the United Kingdom, and we'll wait to see what the outcome is in due course.
But if you do lose, or if you win but only with a very small majority, that will be because of government unpopularity rather than Liberal Democrat popularity in this area, won't it?
Well, I think whatever the voters of Brent East decide, they will be sending a message to the government, and the government will have to take that on board. We'd be fools not to. In that instance, we'll be analysing the outcome of the result, looking at what issues we came across in the thousands of face-to-face discussions that we had with the voters in Brent. They told us the items that were of concern to them. We told them what we were delivering on their behalf and trying to in terms of our public service reforms. We clearly have got a lot more explaining to do in terms of the successes we believe we are achieving for the people of Brent East.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed, Jim Fitzpatrick, for the time being. We'll be bringing you much more when we have more, but for the time being, back to the studio.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed. We'll be keeping a close eye of events there in Brent. I'm joined now by the Local Government Minister Nick Raynsford, the Conservative Party Chairwoman Theresa May, and the Liberal Democrat MP Ed Davey. Ed Davey, let me come to you first, because Mr Jim Fitzpatrick didn't sound terribly confident down there. What are you hearing?
Well, we're hearing it's very close. Reeta, your correspondent, was suggesting that we might just have pipped it. If so, it would be an absolutely staggering result. We were saying earlier that we needed a 26.3% swing, a huge swing, to win this seat. It'd be phenomenal. And if we've done it, it would be staggering. And I think that the tide is turning for Tony Blair if we have achieved that. It's a pretty bad result anyway for Labour to allow it to come so close.
Didn't you put your finger on it? Tide turning for Tony Blair, but not necessarily, really, anything very significant for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, you say that, but then look at what's been happening in the polls. We've been above 20% with the exception of one poll for over a year. That's our largest support, sustained for over a year. And then in the last local elections last May, we scored our record ever result with 30% of the vote. So it's not just this one odd by-election, it's sustained opinion poll ratings, it's sustained support in real votes across the whole country.
OK, Theresa May, let me come to you now, because I've just got my book of statistics out. Mitcham and Morden, the 3rd of June 1982 was the last time the Conservatives gained a by-election. 21 and a half years, and you're not even close this time.
Well, I think the real story of tonight is going to be Labour's failure. If they have lost the seat to the Liberal Democrats, or if they just hold it on a very, very close vote, what people will be saying quite clearly is they're giving a message to Tony Blair that they're fed up with a government that is failing to deliver on its promises, that is taxing and spending and failing, and they're fed up with a government they don't believe they can trust anymore.
Can we do a deal? I will put those sort of points to Nick Raynsford, but you address the points relating to the Conservative Party, which are that here you are, you're hoping you're going to win the next election. We're 2 years into this Parliament. Tony Blair has been in power now for over 6 years. There's been a very unpopular war in Iraq. There's been the whole scandal surrounding the Hutton inquiry, a massive loss of public trust, and the Conservative Party is trailing a terrible, poor third.
Well, this is not a seat that the Conservatives have held before. It's a seat that has, even in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was sweeping the rest of the country, Brent East was electing Labour members of Parliament, including Ken Livingstone. This is not natural Conservative territory. And I think what we have been seeing is the Labour Party supporters giving a very clear message to Tony Blair that they don't like what he's doing, looking around for another party of the left that they can vote for. The Liberal Democrats positioning themselves on the left so that they were opportunistically going to take this. And we know Liberal Democrats have had by-election victories in the past, which they've claimed as staggering results. I have to say, I think the largest swing they got in favour of them was in Christchurch, and we took the seat back at the following general election. So really, we see these blips from the Liberal Democrats from time to time, but it doesn't actually translate into general elections.
But you know, by-elections do matter. They gave us a picture in the run-up to 97, for example. They gave us a picture that the Conservatives were desperately unpopular and that the Labour Party really had momentum. We are seeing nothing that gives any indication that the Conservatives have any momentum, and by all accounts, from what we're hearing from the count.
I have to say, John, that first of all, you're wrong to say that the by-election results prior to 1997 showed Labour having momentum. The Christchurch by-election that I've just quoted, where the Liberal Democrats took it from us, the Labour Party lost their deposit, yet they went on to win a general election. But if you want to talk about momentum, let's talk about what's been happening this year. Back in the May council elections, we did extremely well, over 500 more councils, gaining control of 30 more councils. This very evening, we're seeing that we have been taking seats. We've down in Fareham, we've gained a council by-election for the Liberal Democrats with a swing of some 22%. We've had a swing to us from Labour up in Telford and Reeking. An important area for us at the general election. If you look at the overall picture of what is happening, we are getting that momentum.
Right, Nick Raynsford, I heard you muttering desperate under your breath, but the combined points that Theresa May and Ed Davey have just made have some force. In the local council election, the Tories did extremely well, much better than most people had expected and anticipated. The Liberal Democrats, in a Labour stronghold where you had a majority of 13,000 at the last general election, looked like they may be about to overturn it. There are serious problems, are there not, for Mr Blair and your government?
I've already said very openly that we've gone through a difficult patch. No question about it. The government has had a really hard time in the last few months. It's hardly surprising if we're seeing a by-election where the result is likely to be disappointing for us, whether we lose it or not. But that you have to put in context. This is the first by-election where we look as though we are at risk of losing it in the entire time we've been in government. By contrast, the Tory party were losing by-elections hand over fist when they were in power. And the principal opposition party, which then was Labour, was, as you rightly say, showing real momentum with the prospect of winning. Now, Theresa is desperate if she has to refer to the odd by-election in a council somewhere in the West Midlands, where, as far as I can gather, the Tories didn't even win it.
I'm going to bring Theresa...
The only part of whom the word desperate should be applied to tonight is the Labour Party, because what we do see is this very clear sign of Labour's own supporters deserting them. Now, yes, they've looked for a party of the left that they can vote for, and the Liberal Democrats, we know, are very good at positioning themselves for a particular victory on a particular night. But it's the Labour Party who people are giving a very clear message to, that they don't like their taxing and spending and failing. And it's all very well Nick Raynsford will try to say, oh, this is all about the Conservative Party, but it isn't. Actually, this was a Labour seat. It's Labour heartland. They had 63% of the vote at the last general election, and if they only just win it, or if they lose it to the Liberal Democrats, the story of tonight is about Labour's failure.
The interesting thing about the Tory campaign in Brent East was it hardly figured their leader. I didn't see a single leaflet with Ian Duncan-Smith on, and they didn't mention him. It was almost as if Brent East Tories were embarrassed about their leadership. And I think that's a very clear sign of where the Tories are going wrong. They're not appealing, they're not reaching out. And here we have Ian Duncan-Smith in Parliament trying to say they're the compassionate Conservatives, that they'll reach out to the inner cities. This was a test. This was a test of the compassionate conservatism that Ian Duncan-Smith says he's offering. And it's been completely rejected, Theresa. And I think if you, as the Conservative Party, if you can't even beat the Liberal Democrats in a seat like this, when we were coming from third, I mean, you've really got problems.
Let me, in a gesture of friendship, Theresa, say something where I...
That's what I love about by-election programmes, because it's always the gestures of friendship that raise the tone.
That doesn't talk about the Labour Party's failure, I'm sure.
Let me indicate where I'm in agreement with you. You're absolutely right that the Liberal Democrats have a tradition of doing well in by-elections, and not a great deal follows from it. I'm in a rather strong position to say that, because the last time the Liberal Democrats, or their equivalent, the SDP, won a by-election from the Labour Party was in Greenwich. And I am now the Member of Parliament for Greenwich and have been for the last 11 years. So on the whole, if they win by-elections, yes, good luck to them. They're quite good at it. But it doesn't on the whole last very long.
But tell that to Simon Hughes.
Winchester, Simon Hughes,
David Rendell,
yes,
Matthew Taylor, Alan Beef.
But in fact, the vast majority you've lost. You won them for a while and then lose them. I'm not denying the fact you haven't held on to some of those
seats.
Most
of them we've actually held on. If you look back at the by-elections post-war, you'll find that we've actually held on to more than we've lost.
Whether it's Christchurch that Theresa was talking about earlier, or Greenwich that I'm talking about, or other ones, you tend to be rather good at by-elections, but you aren't so good at actually holding on in the long term.
Well, let me actually take that on, because what I said before was if you look at the opinion polls now, we've been tracking at 20% and above for over 12 months. We've not done that in previous parliaments. In mid-term in parliament, our opinion poll ratings have been in the teens and sometimes below 10%. In this parliament, it's above 20%. And then in the national test, 30% are record ever. So it's not just by-elections, it's the wider poll.
Let me, in the spirit of friendship, do you agree with one thing, that there is something very extraordinary about the mid-term of this parliament, that when a government has, as I've admitted, gone through a difficult patch, it is quite extraordinary for the principal opposition party not to be in the lead in the opinion polls. Absolutely. And that is astonishing.
In the spirit of friendship, go on then. Theresa, very quickly. So I want to go live to the scene. Go on.
Well, I was simply going to point out that actually in some recent opinion polls we have been in the lead in these opinion polls, and the trend for us has been on an upward trend. Okay. And the momentum we're showing, as we've seen in results around the country over this year, has been that we have actually been showing that we can win those elections.
Okay, in the spirit of friendship, we're going to go to Brent East now, because everyone's being so nice to one another. Let's just go to the scene there now, where you can see the ballot papers are piling up there on the tables, and I think it looks like they have obviously been sorted. Reeta Chakrabarti, I think you're listening and can see what we're seeing there, which is the piles of papers. That looks like they're making good progress, or are they still in the process of verifying the papers?
No, I think counting has in fact started. They've taken quite some time to verify, but I think I'm right in saying that the counting has actually started. The estimated declaration time was meant to be about 1 o'clock, but the Liberal Democrats, who are being very quietly confident about a result now, they say that a recount is still a possibility, so it might well be that this gets somewhat prolonged. In the meantime, I have with me here Eric Ollerenshaw, who is the leader of the Conservatives on the Greater London Assembly. Mr. Ollerenshaw, if the predictions are right, if the Liberal Democrats have put in a very strong showing, it means that you've been pushed into third place. That really is a very bad performance by you, isn't it?
No, I mean, let's get this real. This is a terrible performance for Labour tonight. This is a disaster for Labour if they actually lose this seat. I mean, get real, this is Brent East, this is the heart of Labour heartland. For us to do well here would have been absolutely incredible. What has happened here, the Liberals have pursued a very cynical campaign, and it looks like they may have taken it. And we've been here before, Liberals can take by-elections, but when it comes to the actual general election, you've got to explain your policies, and that's when the Liberals have problems. Say one thing here and one thing there, but tonight is really a disaster for Labour.
Well, I think no one would disagree with you in your saying that this isn't naturally fertile Conservative territory. Nonetheless, you will have gone from second place in the last election to third now with a mid-term government, the government facing so many problems. That surely is a bad showing.
It's not brilliant, but we actually believe we've actually held our vote at 17% from last time. And if we can hold that vote in this Labour heartland with this fight between the new left-wing Liberals and the old left-wing Labour, then we've done very well, and this bodes extremely well for other places. If Labour have got to now concentrate on fighting in their heartland, just think what that means in all those Tory marginals and Labour marginals, where we are clearly the second party in the country.
If you have come third, what should have been done differently? Should you have fought a different campaign? Or is it something wider, bigger than that? Is it about the leadership?
It's nothing to do with the leadership. What went on here was, if you go around these streets and knock on these doors, New Labour and New Labour policies, so-called, have done very little for the people in Brent. The high crime rates, the terrible housing are still here and getting worse. And on top of that, what seems to have encapsulated for the traditional Labour voter has been real disquiet about the war. And the Liberals have played on that very, very cynically, and that may have actually ensured them for success tonight. But as I said, at the end of the day, this is a by-election. It's not a general election. In a general election, Liberals will have to tell us what they believe in, and then they've got serious problems.
But would you be confident of doing any better in a general election?
Easily. People know what the Tories stand for. We're bringing forward new policies in terms of trying to deal with crime, getting more policemen actually on the streets. We've been trying to explain those policies. You look at what the Liberals have been saying. They haven't explained any one of their policies. They haven't told people about their views on the euro. They haven't told people about their views on crime and on imprisonment. All those things. In a general election, the Liberals can't get away with that. They've got to explain their policies, and that's where they always fall down.
but your party has nationally over the last few months been trying to promote a slightly different image, a softer image. There was an away day, 2-day away day just recently talking about compassionate conservatism. There would be quite a few people in this constituency who you think would qualify for that sort of compassionate conservatism, who ought to be listening and who probably aren't if you have come third.
Absolutely, but that is going to take some time, and let's be realistic about it. And let's get back to it. This is Brent East. We haven't won here for 30, 40 years. This is Ken Livingstone's heartland. Labour even had to wheel Ken Livingstone out in this last week to try and shore up their vote. This is actually good news for us in those other areas where actually we are the main contender against Labour, and actually in the country, as everybody understands, it's Tories or Labour, and that will count. This is a disaster tonight for Labour.
OK, well, we'll have to leave it there. Eric Ollerenshaw, thank you very much indeed. Just one more piece of information to give you, which is that we have finally a turnout, an official turnout figure, and that is 36.42%. So that's a little bit over 36%. Now back to the studio.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed. I wonder whether we can just give you a picture of the people that are busy there counting down in Brent. Look at the size of those ballot papers, because you've got so many candidates. The ballot paper is some 18 inches long. And it may sound a ridiculous point to make, but actually the sheer size of these makes them fantastically unwieldy. And that's probably what is slowing up the count. You can't just flick through them when they're the normal size. When in a general election you may have 3 or 4 candidates or 5 candidates standing. When you've got as many as you've got standing tonight, and because there's been such a long gap since the last by-election, everybody's wanted to throw their hat of various shapes and colours into the ring. And that is part of the reason, as you can see, that poor chap there, probably a local bank worker or whatever, who's volunteered to give up his Thursday night to come and count, struggling to go through all those lengthy, awkward ballot papers. Now, I think we can go back to Reeta, who's got, I bet, a smiling guest. Reeta.
Yes, a very smiling guest indeed, John. I'm joined by Simon Hughes, who's the Liberal Democrat MP for Bermondsey. Simon Hughes, are you going to pull this off tonight, do you think?
I now think we might, Reeta. Last week I didn't think we would quite. I thought we'd overtake the Tories and get them well out of the way, and that's proved to be the case. Don't forget, they nearly won this seat about a decade ago. A
long time ago.
Yeah, but they were the challengers and they were second last time. We thought we'd overtaken them, and we clearly have. As this week went by and I saw Labour throwing more people and more MPs, and then Mr Livingstone suddenly being used in all their literature and in all their activities, I thought they probably were desperate but would manage to hold on, but it may be they just haven't done it. And if that's the case, I haven't done all the figures, but it will have been one of the great victories by us against Labour. I think the last time Labour lost to us in government was 1979 at the end of the Callaghan government, and an election followed. And it would be an extraordinary result in a seat which has been, a solidly Labour part of London, very mixed community, and where clearly the community is so mixed that you can't simplistically say, oh, it was all because of the war and it was the Muslim community who voted, because there is a Muslim community, but they're not the biggest minority community. The Hindu community is much bigger. There's a big Afro-Caribbean community, big Irish community, so it's a very mixed place.
Although most people, if you do win this seat, most people will look at the result and say, look, this was about the government's unpopularity rather than about your popularity.
Of course that's fair. In by-elections, people first judge the government of the day. And in this by-election, if they said that the government of the day is failing on the public services, and that's what came up regularly, the post office and the health service and the state of the streets in Brent, which are filthy. But if at the same time they said, and we don't like their foreign policy either, and if at the same time they said, and we think the Tories are just hopeless, which is clearly what they've said, the candidate called herself the local Conservative candidate because she didn't want to be associated very much with the national Tory leadership, then that's...
You don't know that.
No, but I'm making the point that here was a campaign which only had the Prime Minister on the Labour literature for the very first leaflet, and then he disappeared, name and photograph never seen. The Tory leader came once. It, for us, is a huge success against both. Yes, of course, a protest first against the Labour government. They have most to worry about. But if I was the Conservative leader, I wouldn't wake up in the morning very happy either.
if you have won, it would be a stunning victory for you. But people will again look at the result and say, is this something they could pull off in a general election? In a by-election, you can pour the resources in. Your leader has practically moved into Brent East, hasn't he? You can't do that repeatedly.
The truth of the matter is that things are moving in our direction. We've never claimed that we can go from having 20% of the votes to winning the general election overnight. But look, last election we won our record number of seats since before the Second World War. The last local elections this year, we got 30% of the vote. The opinion polls are always now higher than they've been before. If on top of that, in this seat, I think Labour's 6th safest seat in London, 54th safest seat in the country, we can win that too. It means the momentum towards this is growing. And Charles Kennedy has been very straightforward, very honest. He said, we are moving forward and taking every opportunity. We will be the next government. Whether we will take over from Labour at the next election or the election afterwards, but we intend to be the next government, and this will help us.
That's a very strong claim.
Well, it is, but I mean, look at the Conservative Party. Does anybody in Britain, including their own members, believe that they're going to win the next election? I don't think anybody does. And the reality is, if the Tory party are failing, why shouldn't there be a change in British politics? Why shouldn't there be the replacement of the Tory party as one of the major two parties by us, as it used to be? We used to be one of the great two parties before the Labour Party were born. Perhaps the next 20, 30 years we'll see a Labour Liberal Democrat battle with the Tories out of the way. And that's our objective. We believe we have better policies for Britain. We believe, had we been in power, we would have had a better policy in relation to Iraq because we would have supported the United Nations. We wouldn't have gone to war when the government took us to war. And we believe we would have invested earlier in the public services. So we do want to sell our policies. It's not all protest. It's a lot of positive alternatives to a Labour government which is losing the plot.
All right, Simon Hughes. Well, we'll have to wait and see what the electorate really has decided. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed. And back now to you in the studio, John.
Reeta, thanks very much indeed. I don't know whether you noticed that phalanx of camera crews sweeping through the back of shot there. That was the Labour candidate, Robert Evans, arriving at the count. Always the tradition that the candidates arrive a little bit late when the count is well underway. Theresa May, let me just pick up with you this whole idea, which the local Conservative spokesman was talking about down there, is that, well, Liberal Democrats can win seats, but they'll lose them at the next election. We've seen these blips before. Everyone said after 97, when Liberals just rocketed up to 46 seats, that that's it, they're going to lose them all at the next general election. They will only hold on to them for a very short period of time. What happens? The Liberal Democrats go up from 46 seats to 52 seats. They're not losing them. They are holding them. They are establishing power bases. That must be a serious strategic concern for the Tories when there are so many Tory Lib Dem marginals now.
Well, they didn't actually hold all their seats at the last general election. We did take some seats back from the Liberal Democrats at the last general election. But the issue is, the point is, John, that we have these by-election victories from the Liberal Democrats from time to time. We've seen them win elections against us in the past, particularly when we were in government. We now potentially see them winning an election against Labour tonight. But they don't translate that, actually, into making the breakthrough that would take them to government. I mean, Simon Hughes says, oh, we will be the next government. But we've heard that from the Liberal Democrats before. What was it, David Steele? Go back to your constituencies and prepare for government. I mean, how it proved to be a very silly thing for him to have said, because it simply wasn't the case. And the point is, very simply, that they fight by-elections, but when it comes to the general election, when people say, who is it that we want to be in government, when they actually look at policies and principles and whether parties have got something they believe in, then they look to Labour and the Conservative Party. And I believe that the momentum we have been showing will come through, and at the next general election there is indeed every opportunity for us now to take that.
OK, well, let's bring some shots of pictures of Robert Evans, the Labour candidate, who's arrived now at the count, sitting down, looking moderately cheerful, I would say. I would say that's a rather forced smile. I know it's going to be an uncomfortable evening, but I have been told by my minders I must smile for the cameras, Nick Raynsford. Is that potentially what we're seeing there, the kind of grin riveted into position?
Well, I remember when I fought a by-election, I was told all sorts of things by minders, and I tried to ignore most of it because the main thing is to be natural and to be yourself. And Robert, I've known for many years. He's been an extremely good European Parliament member, and I think he will go on being, whatever the result tonight, a credit to the Labour Party and to the people of London who he serves as a member of the European Party.
Simon Hughes made an interesting point there when he was talking to Reeta a moment ago about the whole question of political leadership and the party leaders. And Simon Hughes made a rather disparaging comment about Ian Duncan Smith, but also saying that Tony Blair, once the great electoral asset, once his photo shown everywhere, has been off all election literature apart from the opening leaflet of the campaign by the Labour candidate. Has Tony Blair become a liability to the Labour Party?
No, he hasn't. I actually recall on the doorstep in Brent East just a week or so ago, talking to a number of people who reaffirmed their confidence in him as the outstanding Prime Minister this country has had in the last 20 years. And he will carry on as Prime Minister. He has got a huge contribution to make, and a large number of people in the country, whatever their current unhappiness, and there have been unhappinesses in the last few weeks,
has he made
recognise it is inevitable that any Prime Minister who's been in a dominant position as he's been, straddling British politics for the last 10 years, can't get every issue right all the time, but he's been extraordinarily successful across an enormous range.
Let me just interrupt you, because the pictures you're seeing there while you were talking is of Sarah Tether, the Liberal Democrat candidate, who has also arrived at the count this evening, perhaps on the edge of pulling off one of those remarkable by-election victories, which is the part of the lifeblood of British politics, which will be analysed and interpreted hugely over the coming days, and if the Tories are right, will be forgotten about maybe some months later. Ed Davey, she made a big play of being the local candidate. Local to Islington, that is, rather than local to Brent East, which is quite a few miles away. Isn't that right?
Well, she talked about the issues. She talked about the issues of facing the people of Brent. Actually, it was a Conservative candidate who talked about being the local candidate and tried to ignore the national...
Because she actually lives in Brent and was the local candidate compared to the Liberal Democrat.
Well, you were the ones who were taking the Labour candidate apart for living in Weybridge and calling it Millionaires Row on your leaflets, which I thought was a bit below you. But Sarah is a very, very strong candidate. She's a health expert. She works for Macmillan as a health analyst. She's a scientist in her training. I think she's got a great potential. She'll be the youngest MP if she is returned, and we look forward to welcoming another woman on the Liberal Democrat benches if the result goes our way.
How much is it down to a Sarah Tether or anybody else who stands in a by-election? Is it the individuals, or is it just the mass swirl of party events, the state of the parties nationally?
I think when it's your first election, it's more about the national backdrop, to be fair. Sarah fought a hard campaign, but I think she'll be the first to admit that it was, on the streets of Brent, it was people's reactions to what's been happening in national politics. And when I was campaigning with Sarah, we found a real anger with the Labour government. People, I think, were disappointed in 1997, in 2001, and gave Labour another chance. And I think now they're getting disgusted with Labour's failure to deliver on public services, with the attitude they took in not telling the truth about the facts in the run-up to the war, and then actually deciding to go to the war. And I think that anger that we felt when we were campaigning in Brent has actually helped us win the victory, if we have one, tonight.
What did you find in your canvassing with Muslim voters in the constituency?
Well, I actually didn't meet many Muslim voters. I met, as Simon said, quite a large number of Hindus. But the Muslims that I met did actually feel pretty cross with the Labour Party and Tony Blair in particular. They had been traditionally strong Labour supporters. Sarah told me about an event that she went to at the mosque, where she was mobbed by lots of Muslims attending the mosque, who were saying they were Labour Party members, but they were going to vote for her because of their disgust at the way Tony Blair had gone about the war.
Theresa May, just the impact of the war on Britain's sort of diverse ethnic community. How much you the Conservative Party supported the war, although you're putting some distance now, but how worrying do you find that?
Well, can I just pick up what you've just said about our position, John? You say we're putting some distance between us. What we are doing is saying, yes, there are questions about how the government handled information, and obviously we wait to see what comes out of the Hutton inquiry. We'd have preferred to see a full judicial inquiry with a wider remit taking place, and certainly think there is some things which the Prime Minister needs to explain. But we backed the war because we thought that that was the right thing to do. We thought that taking that action was the right thing to do for Britain, and that it was right to bring freedom and justice to the Iraqi people and to get rid of Saddam Hussein. We backed that, and I continue to believe that that was the right decision to take. I have to say, I think the Liberal Democrats have rather opportunistically used this issue of the war, and because
people raising it with us, Theresa, people raising on the doorstep.
Well, you've actually raised it with them as well, Ed, and I think
we're responding to what they're telling us.
What we know from...
If you don't want to respond to the public, that's an odd thing to do.
Well, Ed, you have to admit that Charles Kennedy enjoyed enormously appearing in the anti-war march one week, and then curiously a week later he was saying, back the troops, I don't wish to be seen with the anti-war protesters.
He was still against the war.
That was pure opportunism.
It wasn't opportunism, because he was still against the war. We've always been against the war. But if you are saying that it's odd to be against the war but not want the British troops to be safe, that's a bizarre thing to say.
He changed his position
you can be
and his
against the war,
stance.
but support British citizens when they're in danger.
You know very well, he changed his position.
To suggest that Liberal Democrats wouldn't support British citizens when they're in danger, put by your government, is a nonsense.
We have seen the Liberal Democrat Party changing. We've seen the Liberal Democrat Party changing what it's been saying on the issue about the war, changing its position, changing its position on the issue of weapons of mass destruction. For example, the Liberal Democrat Party has gone from one side to another.
Let Theresa go.
What is important? Yes, I mean, we supported the government on the action in Iraq. We believe that was the right thing for this country. We continue to believe that it was right, as I say, to bring freedom and justice to the Iraqi people. We recognise that the stance that we were taking might be unpopular with some people, but we believed it was the right thing to do. And I think sometimes, in politics, you have to step up to the mark and say, yes, we actually believe this is the right thing. We're not going to play party politics with it, and I'm afraid that's what we saw the Liberal Democrats doing.
Okay. Well, look, we're going to leave it there, although we're going to stay with that particular thing because we're going to have a summary of the news, where Iraq, of course, is our lead story. Because we've learned this evening that 3 more US soldiers have been killed and 2 others wounded in an ambush near Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit. Military officials say the troops were inspecting a suspected weapons site when they were fired upon. It's the latest in a series of attacks on American troops. Earlier, 2 servicemen were injured when their convoys were attacked on a road west of Baghdad. Some eyewitnesses claim another 3 soldiers were killed in that ambush. Hurricane Isabel has hit the east coast of the United States, bringing 120-mile-an-hour winds and heavy rains. A state of emergency has been declared in 7 states along the Atlantic coast. The storm has moved on shore, leaving more than 1 million people without power. The BBC correspondent Andrew Gilligan has denied doctoring his computer notes of a meeting with the government's weapons expert, Dr. David Kelly. The Hutton inquiry was shown 2 versions of his notes of the meeting, and only the second contained a reference to Alistair Campbell. Andrew Gilligan has told the inquiry he handed his organiser to the BBC on the 18th of July. He said he didn't carry out any experimentation on the machine before that date. Lord Archer could lose his peerage under plans to reform the House of Lords. Peers convicted of a criminal offence would be forced to give up their title and their seats in the upper chamber. Announcing the plans, the Lord Chancellor said the right to sit in a Parliament was a privilege, not a possession.
We also propose to bring the rules for disqualification for membership of this House in respect of detention following conviction for an offence into line with those for the House of Commons. We do not believe that this difference of treatment can any longer be justified. We therefore propose that in future such peers will forfeit their membership of the House exactly as if they would if they were MPs. In addition, they will be deprived of their peerage. The provision will have retrospective effect.
Lord Falconer. A court in Morocco has jailed a French man for life for plotting terrorist attacks. Pierre Robert was also found guilty of possessing weapons and endangering state security. His trial was part of investigations into the Casablanca suicide bombings in May, which killed 45 people. He and the 33 others on trial with him were arrested after the attacks. Pierre Robert had denied all the charges and claimed he'd been tortured in custody. The no-frills airline Ryanair has suffered a legal setback in France. A French appeals court has refused to overturn a previous ruling which claims that the airline had received illegal subsidies from the operators of Strasbourg Airport. Ryanair says it will now suspend the route on the 24th of September. Well, the time now, it's 4 minutes past 1. We're still waiting for that result from Brent East. We can see that people are busy beavering away, counting those mammoth polling papers, and we 36 or so percent turnout, which I think was higher than some people had been predicting. Let's cross to Reeta Chakrabarti, who's there at Brent Town Hall monitoring events for us. Reeta Chakrabarti, sorry, just give us those turnout figures again. Hi, Reeta, can you hear me?
Hello, John. Sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I just wanted it's all right. Just give me the latest. The turnout figures remind us.
Well, the turnout figure is just above 36%, which, although it's low, it's not as low as some recent figures have been. The one that everyone was looking at was one in Leeds in 1999, where the turnout was just 19%, and there had been fears that it would be the same here because it was a similar sort of inner city seat. But no, 36%, so relatively healthy. People originally had thought that a higher turnout would probably be a good news for Labour, in that if anyone was going to stay at home, it was going to be Labour voters. However, it looks as if we've got an entirely different story on our hands here, because we are looking at an imminent Labour defeat.
Well, how imminent would you say that defeat is, i.e., when do you think we're going to get a result? Stick your neck out.
Well, John, I don't know if it's really worth my career. I mean, we're getting all sorts of predictions. 5 minutes ago, it was going to be in 15 minutes. Then we suddenly heard no, it was probably more like 45 minutes, possibly even an hour. So I'm afraid I really can't say. But what I can tell you is that I'm joined now by the Schools Minister, Stephen Twigg. Mr. Twigg, it looks like a potentially huge upset, a real slap in the face for you tonight. It's going to be very bad for you, isn't it?
Well, we don't know the result yet, but it's clearly going to be close, and that will represent a big swing against us, and we have to consider what that means. But I think Robert Evans has fought a first-rate campaign, focusing on the issues that I think matter to people, and on the doorstep, the issues that people are raising are issues like crime, education, health, and obviously what we've got to do is to take the message from the voters of Brent that we've got to deliver in those key areas.
But the assumption will be that it's not really about the local campaign, but about the wider picture, that this will be a vote against the government, if you like, and not about your particular candidate. I mean, how are you going to start dealing with that?
Well, this is a classic mid-term by-election, and the Liberal Democrats, and before them the SDP and the Liberal Party, they had a long track history of actually winning big by-election upsets and then going on to lose those seats in subsequent elections. So, of course, we need to listen to what the voters of Brent East are saying this evening, but I don't think people should believe that that signals some massive shift in what's going on. We need to listen to what people are saying, but I think the main message that I take from the work that I've done here is that people want us to focus on crime, on education, on health, on transport, the big priority issues for us in government.
But you're playing this down. If you do lose here tonight, this will be your first defeat as a party in 15 years. I mean, that will be extraordinary. It'll be a huge upset.
Well, what a remarkable track record that we've actually got as a party under Tony Blair's leadership. We haven't previously lost a by-election like this. But what we do need to do, of course, is to listen to the concerns of people in Brent East about all sorts of different issues, and the Labour Party will be doing that.
And somebody did point out that, in fact, Tony Blair's image was not one that appeared very much on local campaign literature. I mean, is there some sense now that the Prime Minister is almost becoming less of an asset and more of a liability?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. I think what we've seen here is the Liberal Democrats doing what they're good at doing, which is fighting mid-term by-elections. And they have a long track record of taking seats from Labour and from the Conservatives in by-elections over decades. Of course we need to listen to Brent East people and what they're saying in this election, but I don't think we should read that much significance into that.
And how much will the war have been a factor in this, do you think?
Well, I think clearly Iraq is a factor. I've been out on the doorstep and it's come up on the doorstep. It would be foolish for me to deny that. But I don't think it's been as significant a factor as the key areas of public services like crime, like health, like transport. That's what we've got to focus on if we're going to win back the trust of those people in Brent East who have switched away from Labour today. Most of whom, of course, have actually not voted rather than switching to another party, with nearly 2/3 of voters in Brent East actually not taking part. And I think that's something of concern, I hope, to everyone, whatever whatever party we're in, that 2/3 of people chose not to take part in this election.
You, of course, yourself were famously the beneficiary of a huge swing in 1997 when you took Michael Portillo's seat. What does it feel like to be on the other end, if you like, of the extreme?
Well, I joined the Labour Party in 1982, so I've seen election defeats as well as election victories, and I think that's the nature of politics. The most important thing is that whatever the result tonight, we learn from it, we listen to what the people of Brent East have said. But I think what is very clear tonight is that the people of Brent East are not turning to the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party are going to be a humiliating third in this election, and if they were serious contenders to come back to power in 2 years' time, they should be the ones who are challenging us here rather than the Liberal Democrats. So I'm not denying that a big swing away from us is not good news for us, but it's certainly not good news for the Conservative Party either, and they will have to have their own inquest about this election as well.
There we must leave it. Stephen Twigg, thank you very much indeed, and we'll bring you any more news as soon as we have it. Now back to you in the studio, John.
Rita, thank you very much indeed. Well, you can see those counts, the counters, the tellers still counting away. Still looks like they've got quite a lot of work to do, and I would estimate from having spent many an evening at these by-elections that they're a little way off yet because they haven't gathered the agents around to argue over spoilt ballot papers. They're still a long way off, it would be my guess. But the turnout, 36%, I mean, it's not huge compared to the Swedish referendum and joining the euro this weekend where there was 81% turnout, but compared to a lot of other recent by-elections, it's not at all bad. Now, I suppose the conclusion that people will draw then, Nick Raynsford, is not so much that your people just stayed at home, and that they were apathetic. They actually moved. They've shifted from voting for Labour to the Liberal Democrats.
I think that's almost inevitable if you have a position.
Yeah, but it could have been that it was simply that your voters stayed indoors, couldn't be bothered to vote, very low turnout, and on a very low turnout the Liberal Democrats get in. This isn't that much lower than the turnout in the general election. If the Liberal Democrats take it, it means that thousands of people have switched.
Well, the first point to say it is a low turnout, and it's a lot below the level of turnout in the general election. I fought a by-election in 1986. The turnout was in the 60s. That was regarded as a reasonably good turnout in a by-election, and that, of course, was a Labour victory, and it did portend the beginning of a Labour recovery. But let's remember, the Tories were in power then, and it was 10 years from then, 11 years, in fact, before we won the next general election. So you shouldn't attach too much importance to mid-term by-elections. But coming back to your point about what people have done, some people have stayed at home, no question about that. Some people may well have shifted, and a mid-term protest in which the Liberal Democrats have been very successful in attracting votes from both sides, because they play the field, they say one thing to one side and one to another, and they're quite successful at attracting votes temporarily.
I was quite interested by what Stephen Twigg said. It's saying it's nothing to do with the war. It's crime, it's health, it's... Well, if it's not to do with the war, that makes your problems even more extreme, doesn't it? Because if you're failing to, if the war has played no part in it, your unpopularity is down to the fact that your policies are not convincing people that public services are getting any better.
Well, my reading of it is that the war was a factor. I don't think it was the only factor by any means. But the country was divided, about 50-50 over the war, and it also divided across parties. And it would be surprising when people felt very, very strongly about it if some people who are traditional Labour supporters, who feel uncomfortable, chose not to vote or voted for the Liberal Democrats on that issue. But there were other issues as well. And Stephen was absolutely right to highlight the huge importance of public services, which is our main priority. We are putting a great deal of extra money into improving the health service, improving education, improving other public services, and over the next 2 years we're going to drive on to really deliver the improvements that the people want.
OK, well, we can see there in our picture there a smiling Uma Fernandes, the Conservative candidate, although quite what she's going to have to smile about we wait to see, of course, and we wait for the voters of Brent East to deliver their verdict, which we'll know and bring to you live. But by all accounts, from what we're hearing, Theresa May, it's not going to be that cheerful a night for Uma, or for you, I would dare to suggest.
Well, I have to say, in the last few days, an awful lot of people have been saying that the Conservative vote was going to completely collapse in Brent East. All the signs are that actually it hasn't, that we have held our vote, and I think that is significant. I've said all along, this is not natural Conservative territory. It is a seat that, even in the mid-80s, was electing Labour members of Parliament. I mean, Uma Fernandes has been a super candidate. She's a local, genuine local candidate, and somebody who knows and understands the community.
Let's just talk about leadership for a moment, if I might, with you, because I spoke to Nick Raynsford about whether Tony Blair had become a liability, and you heard Reeta Chakrabarti putting that question to Stephen Twigg. How popular would you say Ian Duncan Smith is in the country at the moment?
I think that what people see when they see Ian Duncan Smith is somebody who is a very straightforward, honest and decent politician, and somebody who is genuinely interested in the issues that matter to them, and who is, as with his party, actually starting to show that we have answers that can provide the solutions that people are looking for. Answers that will actually deliver where Labour have failed to deliver, because that's what people are increasingly fed up with, is the way that the government is simply failing to deliver on its promises.
It's quite interesting. I asked you how popular he is, and you say, well, he's a decent man.
No, I didn't. I said that I think actually people see very positive things about him. That's what I was saying. I think that people are looking to Ian Duncan Smith as somebody who is a very different politician from Tony Blair, somebody who doesn't just care about headlines and spin, but who actually cares about doing the right thing for this country. And that, I think, is what is leading to his increased popularity on the doorstep.
But I just wonder how far away he is from being seen by the British public as a potential Prime Minister. Do you think he still has a long way to go on that?
No, I think people are increasingly seeing him as a potential Prime Minister precisely because they are seeing somebody who is willing to stand up and say that we won't, on some issues, on issues we don't play party politics. On issues like the war, we will do what we believe is the right thing to do. And somebody who is straightforward and who says actually politicians and government have got to be different from this Labour government, when nobody believes a word this Labour government says anymore.
But you say this isn't natural Conservative territory. It's a by-election where you've made a considerable effort, where you came second in the general election, where a few years back you came within 1,500 votes or so of taking it, where I think I'm right in saying that you have controlled the council there in Brent. It is not that hostile territory for you, and yet you are making no inroads whatsoever, and in fact you're going to worsen your performance by moving from second to third.
Well, as I said a few days ago, John, actually a lot of people were predicting that and I understand even tonight the BBC has predicted that our vote is going to completely collapse, which is certainly not going to be the case.
We haven't said
that. But can I will answer the point that you make about what it isn't. If you look at what a number of the commentators have said, they've all made the point that this is not a seat that will be a natural expectation for a Conservative victory. It's not a seat that is up there among the seats that we would have looked at a by-election and say, oh yes, that is everybody will say that's something that the Conservatives are naturally likely to take. It isn't natural Conservative territory. But the real story of tonight is not about us. The real story of tonight is about the Labour Party's failure to potentially failure to hold a seat that they have held all through the 80s, when, as I say, we were making inroads in many other parts of the country, and a seat at which at the general election they had 63% of the vote.
Well, I suspect you could equally argue that the real story of tonight is going to be another being fair, and one hates to be fair on the by-election programmes, but if the Liberal Democrats
go on.
I'm going to have to be. If the Liberal Democrats are going to pull it off, it will be a very significant victory, Ed Davey. Now, what do you
Well, you're right. It would be an incredible victory.
I
wanted to comment on Theresa May's argument. She's now saying that holding the vote will be a good result for the Conservatives. What holding the vote means is the Conservatives are going nowhere under Ian Duncan Smith. I mean, it's a dreadful result. Now, if we do win, it shows that we are the main challenge to Labour in key parts of the country. Compassionate Conservatism isn't working in the inner cities in London. And what's interesting, if you look outside London, some of the other cities, look where the Tory vote has collapsed, where there are no Tory councillors. There's not a single Tory councillor in Liverpool, where we run the council. There's not a single Tory councillor in Manchester, where we're the official opposition. There's not a single Tory councillor in Newcastle, where we're the official opposition. Liberal Democrats run York, we run Norwich, we run Cambridge, we run Durham. Now, all these areas, all these cities and large historic towns are the areas that the Tories used to do well in. And it's the Liberal Democrats across the country, not just in London, in Brent, across the country, who are challenged.
Slight correction, Ed, because the Liberal Democrats used to run Sheffield and lost, and Labour is now back in power. Liberal Democrats used to run Tower Hamlets and are now out, and Labour is back in power. Liberal Democrats used to run Hull a year ago and are out again.
Labour used to run York,
so I have to say, your picture of this universal success of Liberal Democrats is gilding the lily, I'm afraid.
We are trading councils here.
Whoever used to run whichever council, the one thing we do know from the elections, local government elections earlier this year, is that the Conservative Party is now the largest party in local government in England. We took control of 30 more councils and more than 500 councillors, new councillors.
And Ed Davey,
and that was significant.
And Ed Davey, didn't Theresa May make an important point when she said that actually what happens in by-elections is that people sense who are the best party best placed to win this by-election, and they switch votes massively to that particular party, but it seems that they're not switching votes massively from the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party may not have gone up on the election in 2001, but it doesn't look like it's going to collapse either.
Well, they've gone from second to third, which is a pretty bad result, and they've not increased their vote, which again is a pretty bad result, in the middle of the term when the Labour Party's doing such a dreadful job in government. It's the Liberal Democrats to whom the voters have turned. Now, let me concede one point.
In the spirit of friendship.
In the spirit of friendship.
Yeah, very good.
A by-election victory doesn't mean the Liberal Democrats are about to storm to power. Yeah. But what it does mean, it sends a very powerful message to
Was
Tony
Simon
Blair.
Hughes getting a bit overexcited earlier on?
No, what he said is... I agree with what he said. He said, we will be the next party of government. He didn't say we're about to become the government, but he said we'll be the next party of government. What that means is the Conservative Party, in the way that it's performing, both in this election, in other elections, and in Parliament, is going nowhere. It's a party of yesterday, it's not growing. Liberal Democrats are the party on the up. That was his point, and I think it's very valid by the
David,
councils that I showed across the country that we're winning.
I'm going to pause there for a moment because we're going to go back live now to Reeta Chakrabarti, who is at the count. Reeta.
Yes, John. If the Liberal Democrats do win here tonight, one of the people who will have been a major player in their victory is the campaigns director, Lord Rennard, who I have with me here. First of all, Lord Rennard, Simon Hughes, we heard a little earlier, being very confident about a Liberal Democrat victory. Is that your assessment too?
Well, it seems now that all the parties have agreed that Sarah Tether has probably won the seat as a Liberal Democrat by a majority of around 1,000. It looks like a swing, a monumental swing of something like 30%. Something will suddenly put her and this seat into the history books. We won't count on anything finally till all the votes are counted, but it looks very much that way.
What will you have done differently here to win this seat?
Oh, very many things. We had a first-class candidate, of course, in Sarah Tether, who I think will be a very able Member of Parliament. We ran, of course, a very strong campaign because we recognised that actually the tide is turning against Tony Blair and New Labour, but the tide remains very far out for the Conservatives. We knew that the Conservatives could never challenge to win in a seat like this. We knew that many people were actually quite angry with Tony Blair's government over very many issues, and that if they wanted an alternative, in urban areas such as this, the Liberal Democrats were the only alternative to the Labour Party.
But what people will of course be asking is this just a blip? Is it one of those mid-term results and a government that is unpopular at the moment, and you happen to be reaping the benefits just now, but you won't necessarily be able to repeat it?
Well, it's 15 years now since Labour actually lost a by-election. I think it's very significant they've lost one tonight. I think it's not just a one-off thing. You have to look only to May and the local elections, where across Great Britain, the BBC estimated the Liberal Democrats held about 30% of the vote. And you have to look back, not very long ago, to Romsey, where Sandra Gidley won 3 years ago. Now, a party that can win Romsey, and a party that can win in Brent East, and a party that can do so well in the local elections in May and in Scotland and Wales, that's a party going somewhere, a party that is challenging the Labour government in a way the Conservative Party simply cannot at the moment.
The Conservatives say, looking at your campaign, that you have fought what they would call a leftish campaign, appealing very much to the anti-war vote. And they say that will count against you when it comes to you trying to take seats off them. Now, you are one of the party's major tacticians. Does that ring true?
I think that Conservatives are very worried because we're breathing down the necks of a lot of Conservative MPs where we're challenging them very strongly. In this campaign, I'd say we've fought a very honest campaign. We've fought people to be told the truth about how to improve public services, the truth about the state of the local council, and people told the truth about things like the Iraq War. People have responded to that, and any criticism of our campaign, I'd simply say, is sour grapes.
But they're suggesting that it's not a performance that you could repeat in more traditional Tory territory.
Well, that's not the evidence of the May elections or of other by-elections or what seems to be happening. The Conservative Party seems to be at a historic low point and remaining there. People, I think, will recognise that eventually the time must come for Labour to go. And when they do go, the Liberal Democrats will be a much better alternative, much stronger in very many parts of the country, where the Conservative Party is now scarcely existent. They started second in this seat. When they were in government in 1987, they were within 1,700 votes of winning this constituency, with 36% of the vote. And now in this by-election, they've gone from a good second to a bad third. And it's the Liberal Democrats who've gained the seat. That I think will be increasingly apparent in Labour seats and in Conservative seats.
what you have done this campaign is really poured resources in. Charles Kennedy has been here 7-8 times in the campaign. That is something that you cannot repeat in a general election, isn't it? This is something that you are good at in by-elections, but can't compete on in a general election.
Well, Charles Kennedy fought a very energetic general election campaign in 2001 in much of the country, and that's partly why we did so well and gained more seats then than any other party. In this campaign, yes, he has been here a lot, and I think it's very noticeable that the Liberal Democrats have had Charles Kennedy here every day this week. We've had him in a lot of our leaflets. But actually, Ian Duncan Smith was only here once, when he said he was very confident of a Conservative victory, and Tony Blair, of course, hasn't been here at all. You look at the Conservative and Labour Party leaflets in this by-election, and for some reason, you never see the Conservative Party leader on those leaflets. And for some reason, even though you always used to see Tony Blair on Labour Party leaflets, you never saw him on a single Labour Party leaflet in this by-election. Now, doesn't that show how things have changed?
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Chris Rennard, Lord Rennard, thank you very much indeed. And now it's back to you in the studio, John.
Reeta, thank you very much indeed. Now, I can't remember how many by-elections I have been to with Chris Rennard, but when Chris Rennard says probably a majority of 1,000 to the Liberal Democrats, I'd sort of bet my last Rolo on him, because he's pretty reliable on figures whether the Liberal Democrats are winning or losing. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, you just heard a very interesting abuse of statistics from him. When he was saying about the last general election...
That's what these programmes are all about.
When he was talking about the last general election, he came out with this very impressive sounding thing. The Liberal Democrats won more seats than any other party. Now, in fact, the Liberal Democrats, I think, got a net gain of 6, but they ended up with just over 50 seats. The Labour Party got over 400 seats, and he has presented this as we've won more seats than any other party. It's a classic manipulation of statistics.
It's just we won the election. I think everyone knows that you won the election.
You heard the phrase.
Well, I think
we're showing that we were the party on the up, which is certainly true.
Right, OK, that point aside, are you ready to concede?
Well, I've said all the way through that I thought this was not going to be a great evening for us. There's no question the government has had a difficult patch, and there is a protest vote, and one's seen that often in mid-terms.
What you're hearing, are you hearing that you have lost a seat?
Well, I think all the evidence that you're hearing and we're hearing here in the studio suggests that the Liberal Democrats are pretty confident, and it looks as though there's a likelihood that they will have won. And I wouldn't be surprised by it. I'd be disappointed by it, but I wouldn't be surprised. But I don't want to attach too much significance to it, because it is a mid-term protest vote, and I can give you one confident prediction tonight, and that is that the pattern of vote and the swing tonight will be completely irrelevant when it comes to the next general election, when different issues will be the subject of the vote, and people will want to see a firm government that's delivering on public services, and that's what Labour is committed to do.
OK, so that's your prediction. But if you were to sit down and write a memorandum after this broadcast to Mr T. Blair from Mr N. Raynsford, what would you say? What do you say the problems are? Where are Labour falling down? Where do you need to convince? What is a problem? Because you had a 13,047 majority only 2 years ago, and it has evaporated, and it looks like there's going to be a Liberal Democrat majority.
I think there are two overriding messages from this. The first is that our overall responsibility is to deliver on the public services that people want to see: better education, better hospitals, more effective action tackling crime and antisocial behaviour, better transport, better public services at the local level, all of that. That is a priority. That is what we're going to be concentrating on. The second message is that governments go through difficult periods mid-term. One of the curious things about the last Parliament was that we didn't, but that is an exception. Normally, governments go through very difficult periods. I was the beneficiary. I won a by-election in the middle of the third term of the Conservative government, and actually the second term of the Conservative government, and they went on to win 2 more terms after that. So don't attach too much significance to mid-term by-election victories.
Could we add a third thing to that maybe you'd like to see Tony Blair spending less time on aeroplanes, strutting around on the world stage, and perhaps concentrating more on domestic issues at home?
No, I want to see Tony Blair continuing to be the very powerful, effective, dominant figure that he has been, both internationally, a figure of huge respect, respected very widely around the world, but also someone who can give leadership, tackling the issues that need to be tackled here at home. He's the right person to do it. He is widely respected as a Prime Minister, and I believe the public will want to see him continuing in Downing Street.
And Theresa May, I don't know whether you'd need to write a memorandum to Ian Duncan Smith, because I'm sure you see him very regularly to discuss issues like this. There are serious lessons, aren't there? I mean, I know you. I'll accept everything you said. This isn't natural Tory territory. It was a difficult by-election for you. I mean, there are arguments against that, and we've put those arguments to you tonight. But what do you say about what you have to learn from this? Because the Liberal Democrats are winning in places as diverse as leafy Romsey down in Hampshire and gritty northwest London in Brent.
Well, the Liberal Democrats, as we've commented earlier as well, do have a track record of winning by-elections and winning in a whole variety of different places. They take a very cynical approach to this. They tend to position themselves in the way they think that is going to actually win that particular seat. I mean, we know that in the instructions they send out to their council candidates. It's about positioning yourself against the Tories if it's a Labour seat, or against Labour if it's a Tory seat. But can I just pick up on one point? Because very interestingly, one thing that Lord Rennard said there, because we've been hearing all of this from other Liberal Democrats about how, isn't it terrible that the Conservatives aren't actually winning this seat. Lord Rennard there said the Conservatives could never challenge to win in a seat like this. So I think actually we're hearing two messages from the Liberal Democrats on that as well. I've said all along it wasn't natural Conservative territory. This is Labour heartlands. What is key about this result tonight, if it looks as we all think it will, that the Liberal Democrats have taken it, is that the Labour Party has lost in what is a real Labour heartland, and that sends a very clear message about how people don't trust this government.
Hang on, so there is nothing at all for the Conservatives to learn from this?
No, I didn't say that. And
well, I've asked you, what are the lessons? What are the lessons to be learned?
Well, after any by-election, after any election, we do what all parties would do, is we will sit down and we will look at how we fought the campaign, and we will say, are there any lessons that need to be learned? We'll take the experience from it and debrief from people.
As the evening stretches out and we wait for the result, we've got time to kick this around a bit.
I actually think
what are the Tories' problems at the moment?
We had a good campaign and a good local candidate.
Well, then you've got something very deep-seated.
We will look at the whole issue of how we fought the campaign as any party would. But as I've said earlier, what we have seen here tonight is a failure of the Labour Party. Labour Party core supporters have not been willing to go and vote Labour, and more particularly, it's not just that they've stayed at home, but they have actually gone out and voted for the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats positioned themselves to take a left-wing vote as a party of the left. They attacked the Labour Party from the left, and in looking, if you're a natural core Labour voter looking for a party of the left to vote for, you don't look naturally to the Conservative Party. People have looked to the Liberal Democrats instead, because that's how they position themselves.
So there's nothing wrong at all with the way the Conservative Party are, or the way they're perceived in the country at the moment?
John, I said that we will look at the lessons that we have to learn from the campaign.
I'm trying to find out what the lessons are. I'm just trying to find out what the kind of things where you think you still have major problems, whether it be in the leadership of Ian Duncan Smith, whether it be in the policies, whether it be in the need to articulate more clearly what a Conservative government would stand for, whether you're still the nasty party. I mean, I'm just interested in those ideas.
In terms of the by-election campaign, as I say, we will sit down and look and learn from that by-election campaign, and that's a process that takes place after the result and after a few days have taken place. In terms of where the party is overall at the moment, we have a momentum in that we did very good local council election results in May. I have to say in May, the BBC was saying that we were going to do very poorly, that it was going to be a very bad night for us. In fact, it was actually excellent results for us with those over 500 extra councillors. We are following that through in those council elections and seeing some of that momentum coming through. But what we're also doing as a party is setting ourselves on a course to the next general election. You don't set yourself as a party on a course for a by-election unless you're the Liberal Democrats. You actually set yourself on the course for the general election, because what we are about is showing that we are the credible alternative government to this failing Labour Party.
Ed Davey, isn't Theresa May absolutely right when she says if you're talking about what is really significant, one snapshot by-election against nationwide council elections where the Conservative Party made huge gains and became, I think to use the correct terminology, the largest party in local government in the country. Isn't that the real significance? That, when you talk in England, when you talk about replacing the Conservative Party as the official opposition, you've still got a huge distance to travel.
The point is we're travelling it, and actually quicker every year. In the local elections that Theresa was talking about, we got our highest ever result, 30% measured by the BBC.
Who were proved to be wrong on most of the other measurements they did that night, actually.
They weren't on
staying out of that debate.
And as I was saying earlier, if you look at the big metropolitan areas of the country, which the Tories would have to win if they were to get back into power. It's the Liberal Democrats who are winning, and you're seeing vast areas of the country where Tory councillors are just non-existent. In big cities like Liverpool, Manchester and Newcastle, not a single Conservative councillor. Now this is huge bad news. Now I'm actually pleased that Theresa's telling us all tonight that there isn't a problem, that she's so complacent that we're not going to worry about this, that is not a disaster for the Tory party, because that's great news for the Liberal Democrats, because if the Tories really don't think they've got a problem, if the Tories really aren't going to change either their leader or their policies or their whole attitude, then actually they really are going to go further down, and they'll give a huge opportunity to Charles Kennedy and the Liberal Democrats. So, Theresa, I'm delighted you don't think this is a disaster that we all know it is.
Theresa May, I remember during the Labour years that they kept on piling up council seats, and they were saying this shows that we're ready at the next general election in 87, in 92 to take power in 83, and each time the Conservatives won in 83 by a huge margin, in 87 by a significantly huge margin, in 92 by a small margin. It wasn't until 97. You can pile up as many council seats as you like, but that doesn't necessarily indicate that much.
Of course, as a party, we have to show people that we're the credible alternative government, that we actually have the policies that deliver on the problems that they're facing. And that is what we're doing as we build our policies and as we announce our policies. What is important and what's significant about those council elections is that we have actually seen Conservative councils putting into practice good Conservative management, able to produce better public services at lower tax for their council taxpayers,
and than any other party,
able to show that they're providing better services at lower council tax, and people have been listening to that, and that is a
last year. In the current financial year, the last council tax rise, Conservative councils increased their council tax by 16%.
That's right.
Labour councils increased by just over 10%, Liberal Democrats just about the same amount, about 10%.
Yeah.
That is the difference. Tory councils are costing people more by putting up council tax, and people will actually want to look into that very closely.
If you want to talk about council tax, the party that has been hitting council taxpayers hard has been this Labour government. This Labour government, which has cynically used council tax as a stealth tax, which has reduced the proportion of funding coming from local government.
It hasn't reduced the percentage. We have increased the funding of local government, whereas your government cut by 7% in the last 4 years. We've increased funding by 25%, and that is a fact.
Council tax has gone up by 70%.
Hang on, that's the councils putting it up. The council's decision, not the government. The government has been increasing funding for councils.
Ed Davey. John, if I may intrude into this little argument between Theresa and Nick, the truth is that the council tax is the most unfair tax in Britain today. The Tories introduced it when their poll tax failed so miserably, and Labour has made it worse. The argument shouldn't be the ones that Theresa and Nick are having. We should be scrapping council tax. That's the sort of message we were putting on the streets of Brent East, and I think it's one of the reasons why it looks like we've won. It looks like Sarah Tether will be joining the Liberal Democrats on the benches.
There's actually a very interesting lesson there, because the Liberal Democrats did canvass and campaign on scrapping the council tax. What they didn't say was the price of doing that would be a significant increase in income tax. They didn't say that because that wouldn't have been very popular.
No,
but that's the truth.
We wanted to replace it with a tax related to ability to pay.
Income tax.
A fair tax, indeed, a fair tax.
Okay, there we will pause because the time now is 1:37. We're still waiting for that result. In the meantime, let me bring you up to date with other news from around the world. The full force of Hurricane Isabel is battering the east coast of the United States. More than 600,000 homes and businesses are without electricity, and tonight 7 states have declared an emergency. President Bush is among those who've left Washington to take shelter elsewhere. The storm, which spans around 400 miles, swept in and hit land late this afternoon.
You can never tell a hurricane by its name. Isabel's been slapping the east coast since breakfast. The quaint piers that line this coast don't stand a chance against 12-foot waves. They called this place Kill Devil Hills, a place where the rain was horizontal today and where the streets were rapidly turned into rivers.
We lost the top layer of our roof on the tower building, and hopefully, we'll weather this thing out.
He might, but these buildings won't. Watch this. Clapboard houses. Americans love them. Hurricanes peel them.
It is windy! I almost can't stand up. You're gonna blow away!
This is a mandatory evacuation zone. Are you gonna leave?
Yeah.
All right, stay safe.
With almost 500,000 people already evacuated, the streets, or what's left of them, are deserted. That leaves a few weather enthusiasts out and about and some reporters.
We're kind of protected here. I'd say
Well, we are certainly trying to hang on here.
This reporter wasn't taking any chances. She persuaded her sound man to help. But Isabel is no joke. The coast is bracing itself for some serious flooding. And so is Washington. In a few hours from now, the capital will come eye to eye with Isabel. For the first time ever, the metro has been shut down completely. This was lunchtime today. Normally these trains are packed.
This is the last train to Shady Grove.
It doesn't look like much at the moment, but in a few hours from now, the full force of Isabel will descend on Washington. They're taking this one seriously. The president has already been evacuated to Camp David, and his plane, Air Force One, has been moved to Georgia. Matt Fry, BBC News, Washington.
3 American soldiers have been killed and 2 others wounded in an ambush near Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit in Iraq. Military officials say the troops were inspecting a suspected weapons site when they were fired upon.
It's one of the strongholds for supporters of Saddam Hussein, a hostile region for American troops. Here, soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division help their injured comrades to a makeshift ambulance. 3 are already dead. They were there, south of Saddam Hussein's hometown Tikrit, to investigate a site they suspected was used to launch rocket-propelled grenades against the US military. Earlier in the day, troops were caught up in a gun battle that lasted hours, according to local people. This ambush west of Baghdad, another sign that resistance is strong and tactics are becoming more sophisticated. A bomb exploded under a Humvee in a convoy in Chaldea. Then the rest of the convoy was pounded by rocket-propelled grenades as it struggled to get back to the relative safety of its base. In the north, an explosion along a pipeline carrying crude oil to Iraq's largest refinery came as another blow. Investigators couldn't get close because the fire was too fierce, but they're in little doubt this was no accident. The main oil export line has been hit by a string of sabotage attacks. The US says its closure is costing the country $7 million a day. Philippa Young, BBC News.
The BBC correspondent Andrew Gilligan has denied doctoring his computer notes of a meeting with the government weapons expert Dr David Kelly. The Hutton inquiry was shown 2 versions of his notes of the meeting, and only the second contained a reference to Alistair Campbell. Andrew Gilligan has told the inquiry he handed his organiser to the BBC on the 18th of July. He said he didn't carry out any experimentation on the machine before that date. Lord Archer could lose his peerage under plans to reform the House of Lords. Peers convicted of a criminal offence would be forced to give up their title and their seats in the upper chamber. Announcing the plans, the Lord Chancellor said the right to sit in Parliament was a privilege, not a possession.
We also propose to bring the rules for disqualification for membership of this House in respect of detention following conviction for an offence into line with those for the House of Commons. We do not believe that this difference of treatment can any longer be justified. We therefore propose that in future such peers will forfeit their membership of the House exactly as if they would if they were MPs. In addition, they will be deprived of their peerage. The provision will have retrospective effect.
A court in Morocco has jailed a Frenchman for life for plotting terrorist attacks. Pierre Robert was also found guilty of possessing weapons and endangering state security. His trial was part of an investigation into the Casablanca suicide bombings in May, which killed 45 people. He and the 33 others on trial with him were arrested after the attacks. Pierre Robert had denied all the charges and claimed he'd been tortured in custody. The no-frills airline Ryanair has suffered a legal setback in France. A French appeals court has refused to overturn a previous ruling which claims that the airline had received illegal subsidies from the operators of Strasbourg Airport. Ryanair says it will now suspend the route on the 24th of September. So, what's happening at Brent Town Hall? Are we any closer? A declaration Reeta Chakrabarti is there. Rita.
Well, it's 45 minutes late now, this declaration. We were hoping for it at 1 o'clock. I heard from somebody that it might well be around 2 o'clock. That was from a Liberal Democrat source, but not an official source, I'm afraid. So, you know, the best guess at the moment is around 2 o'clock. That declaration, it seems fairly safe to say, is going to be bad news for the Conservatives. It looks as if they have come third place, and I'm joined now by the Conservative candidate, Uma Fernandes. Well, it does look as if it's going to be a bad night for you. What's gone wrong for you?
Well, the thing is that the result is not final yet. Obviously, we have come third, but I think what we're seeing here is the dissatisfaction. The electorate's so dissatisfied. It's a failure of the Labour government, and people have shown their dissatisfaction by having a change of their MP.
But why have you not benefited from that dissatisfaction? You are the main opposition. Why have more votes not come, we assume, why have more votes not come your way?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we fought a very hard campaign. We focused very much on local issues because there's a failing Labour Council at the moment with no service delivery, and the electorates are very dissatisfied, and we kept on. It was well received. As far as we're concerned, we have kept our vote, but what it is that the Lib Dem has cashed in on it and played a very opportunistic campaign, very dirty as well. And what's happened is that the left wing of the electorate have gone on to the left wing of the Lib Dem.
Why do you call the Liberal Democrats' campaign dirty and opportunistic? What have they done?
Well, they have. They've cashed in on the issues of war. They've cashed in on.
But they didn't support the war, or they asked many more questions about the war than the Tories did.
But the thing is that there's a lot of they've actually tell a lot of rubbish at the doorstep, making the electorate believe. For example, that the Lib Dem candidate was all the way from Islington, but posing as a local candidate as a local resident or a local campaigner in Brent East, and so on. They just kept, it was very opportunistic. And as far as I'm concerned, we fought a very hard campaign. My campaign team was very focused, and we kept on message all the time, and the electorates did listen to us. And like I said, we maintain our votes.
The point was made by one of the Liberal Democrats earlier on our programme that their leader Charles Kennedy was very high profile in this campaign, been here almost every day, whereas Tony Blair and certainly Ian Duncan Smith have been very low profile. Do you think that he is somebody who has, that the fact that he's the leader has harmed your chances here tonight?
Ian Duncan Smith has been very supportive of my campaign. He was in Brent East, and he gave me his full support, and that was well received by myself, by my campaign team, by the electorate as well, by the voters. What it is, though, our whole campaign focused mainly on local issues. We fought for the bread and butter issues that's affecting the resident of Brent. A lot of that dissatisfaction with the Labour government, and that's what they've shown. It's a failure of the Labour government, not a failure of the Conservative. As far as we're concerned, our voters have pledged our support, and they have voted for us.
But people will still look at this result, you coming third rather than second as you did in the last election, and they are bound to say this is because the party has a leadership that has failed to catch the public's imagination. It is unable to capitalise on the government's relative unpopularity. Is that not what they'll say?
It wasn't a campaign about the leadership. This was a campaign fought on the local issues affecting the resident of Brent. And bear in mind, this Brent East is a Labour stronghold. We were not targeting Brent East. We've never held Brent East. Brent East has never been a Conservative constituency. And what we did, we fought a very hard campaign, and we managed to keep our vote.
Is that the best you ever hoped for?
Well, it is. I mean, I have to keep saying to you, this is a Labour constituency. It's a Labour stronghold. So it's a hard challenge right from start. I knew it's going to be quite a challenge. And I think the fact that we've maintained a very strong campaign right till the bitter end and not listening to all the dirt that the Lib Dem was chucking at us. I think we've done very well in that respect. And we're here to fight for another day.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Uma Fernandes, thank you very much. A philosophical Conservative candidate there. Now back to you in the studio, John.
Thank you very much indeed, and Theresa May was here listening to that. I can see what you say. She's a very strong candidate, and I would imagine pretty popular on the doorstep, I just felt she was struggling to explain why you had moved from second to third place.
I think the points that Uma made were absolutely the right ones, and they're the points that indeed I've been making earlier this evening, and Eric Ollerenshaw did, that this isn't a seat that is natural Conservative territory, it is a Labour heartland, and Labour have done very badly in their Labour heartland, because traditional Labour voters who were looking for a party of the left to vote for voted for the Liberal Democrats instead of voting for the Labour Party. Uma is a super candidate, but she is somebody from the community. She's a local community nurse and a local councillor, and somebody who very much feels the issues of the people in the local community.
I tried to press you earlier about what you might put in a memorandum, or what you might say to Ian Duncan Smith about the lessons to take away from this. Do you accept the point that Ed Davey from the Liberal Democrats was making a few minutes ago, that you really do have a major problem now in the metropolitan areas around the country where you have very, very scant representation? And that means you haven't got the foot soldiers to fight in a general election campaign as more and more councillors drift away, and you have got an ageing population.
I certainly accept that we have got to make inroads into the cities. That is absolutely right, and that's an area that we obviously will be working on in terms of what we do and the policies that we develop. That's certainly something that we are looking at and do have to. And I certainly am not complacent about that particular issue. That's something that we need to address.
Why do you think people in the cities don't like you?
Well, I think we need to be sure that we actually take to people in the cities the message of what we can do to deliver on the problems that they are facing. And the sad thing about this Labour government is that actually very often now it is the people who are in areas like the inner cities who perhaps are those who find it hardest to be able to challenge what the Labour government is doing in their day-to-day lives, who are being left behind by this Labour government. So many people in this country now say that they're simply not getting a fair deal from Labour. So many people are being left behind. Now the policies we're developing, and we still haven't announced everything, but what we are doing as a party is showing that we can actually do what will be necessary to free people up, to trust people, and to actually let them get on with their lives, get government off their backs, and deliver for them in the areas that they're really concerned about, in the public, predominantly in the public services.
Please come back to reality, because people looking at the experience of Britain today and comparing it with what life was like in the 1990s when John Major was Prime Minister, will see an economy which has more people working than ever before. We'll see an economy...
John Major bequeathed you a very sound economy in '97.
John Major caused one of the worst boom-bust crises which thrust hundreds of thousands of people into repossession because of his economic failure, and the consequences of Britain's ejection from the ERM caused massive economic problems.
Post-ERM.
We have stabilised the economy, we have created the highest levels of employment, we have the lowest interest rates, the lowest mortgage rates, there are more people who've got the prospect of good employment and being able to pay for their home on low interest rates for any time in the last 30 years. And those are things that are the result of this government and people can be proud of. Now we've got a lot more to do, we've got a great deal more to do to tackle the many problems in the public services that need to be improved, but the picture that Theresa painted of some sort of ghastly world where people are all suffering is completely nonsensical and very far from the truth.
It's not nonsensical, Nick.
It is
and
totally
on the doorsteps,
nonsensical.
what people are saying is they don't get a fair deal from this government. They've seen their taxes rise, 60 tax increases under this Labour government, a Labour government that promised not to put taxes up at all. They have seen taxes go up. They see money going into public services, but they don't see the results. They do not see the delivery.
Brent East, they've not turned to the Conservatives. The message that we've been putting, that actually we want to allow local authorities to take more charge of services so that people can hold public services to account more. So we have a much more localist approach than the centralised Whitehall-led system that the Conservatives followed and Labour has aped. And that message actually on public service reform is getting through. But I'd like to come back to something that...
Ed Davey, I just want to ask you a quick question. Are the Liberal Democrats now to the left of the Labour Party?
Not at all. Not at all.
But that's where you fought it in Brent. Well, how are you going to fight it in a sort of Tory marginal?
I actually reject this left-right pigeonholing that Theresa's so keen on.
Well, that's because the Liberal Democrats are left in this seat and right in this seat. That's the point.
No, it's because,
they choose the left or right, but it suits them at the time.
I don't know if you notice, but we live in a post-Cold War era, that the Iron Curtain has gone now. So we live in an era where the ideologies of the past, which you've been used to, fighting socialism with, red-blooded capitalism, that's gone. That's the politics of yesteryear. What we're about now is how we deliver better public services. And what we're saying is let's make the people have greater control of them. Let's, on council tax, is this a left-wing policy? You want to scrap council tax because it's an unfair...
You want to put income tax up. You want to put income tax up.
We want tax-related ability to pay.
You want to put income tax up.
I've said that. We want to tax related to ability to pay.
Right, because, thank you, you've got the admission. Yes.
No, I've written about it in today's Daily Express, so it's not exactly something we're trying to hide. We believe council tax, which you introduced, is hitting pensioners really hard. You should be apologising to the pensioners of Britain. It's gross hypocrisy by Ian Duncan-Smith at Prime Minister's Question Time this week when he complained about the Labour record, bad though it is. Council tax is a Tory tax. It's an unfair tax and it should be scrapped.
No, I suppose the point, I accept the point you make, that I think we all accept, that we all recognise and have got enough sense of history that we know that the Iron Curtain has gone. But that, broadly speaking, I think the general point that people make about the Liberal Democrats, and if you watch the Liberal Democrats on the ground in a constituency that is predominantly Conservative, you sometimes get the feel that perhaps the message is slightly different than the one that you might use and deploy in a left-wing...
Let me say that. Let me say that. I'm a Member of Parliament for Kingston and Surbiton, which has been traditionally a Conservative seat. I campaign on better public services, more police on the streets, better pensions. I campaigned and told my voters in articles in local papers that I was dead against the war, that I thought it was a really bad mistake. I said the same messages that we've been saying in Brent. This is just a myth perpetrated by the Tory party because they try to make out we're opportunists and we stick to our principles. The same things that I put on our leaflets in Kingston Surbiton were put on the leaflets of Brent East. It's actually the same across, and that's why we are actually gaining support, because we're coming across, I believe, as a party that says it as it is. Charles Kennedy said at the last election, you can't have something for nothing. He was making very clear that if you wanted to invest in our public services, tax needed to go up. Labour said...
Charles Kennedy didn't say that much about the euro in the last election, when you sense that might be a bit of a vote loser, to stress your support for...
We've been very clear on the euro that we've supported it, and we want a referendum. It's in our manifestos. You can hardly say, John, that we've hidden our position on that. I mean, that would be nonsense.
I'm just saying that I think that you probably looked at polls, realised that it may not be a massive vote winner for you, to stress that you were the one party that was absolutely committed to joining the euro, and therefore you didn't say that much about it.
John, it wasn't the issue of the election. We've said there's going to be a referendum. The government said there's going to be a referendum on the euro. We'll have that debate when the referendum comes. The last general election was on public services. What I was about to say is, what Charles Kennedy said in 2001, you can't have something nothing. He meant that we needed extra taxes to fund public services. Labour said that wasn't true. What happened after the election, they put up national insurance. In order to make sure that the health service and the public services had the money that they needed. We said that at the election. We told the truth. Labour lied to the electorate in 2001.
Nick Raynsford, isn't the truth... I mean, there is... You try to get away with the argument that you could massively improve public services without raising taxes, and it's true that national insurance has gone up, and it's also true that billions of extra money is going into the health service. Yes. Isn't your central problem that no one is seeing any improvement yet? And that if, having spent these billions, that people don't see that their schools, their health service, the roads, the railways are transformed, then people are going to say, right, you've had enough time now. Yeah. You can no longer blame the Tories for what happened.
Look, it's not true that people are seeing no improvements. I think any fair-minded person who looks around will see substantial improvements in many areas, whether it's the new health centres, the new hospitals, the improved schools. All of those things are evidence of improvement, but it's got to go further.
Being sacked.
It's always... We've got 20,000 more teachers than there were when your government were in power, and about 60,000 teacher assistants. So, Theresa, I will take no lessons from you about numbers of teachers.
No,
we have hugely increased investment in education. Education standards are rising as a result. There are more people teaching now than there were when your government was there, and we are going on investing in teaching. But yes, Ed's right. There are problems in some areas, and transport is one of those. But we are tackling them. We're determined to tackle them, and this is a government that is committed to improve living standards for all our people on the basis of a sound economy, as I've described, with low interest rates and one of the most successful economies in Europe. And that was not the case when the Conservatives were in power.
Nick Raynsford, I suspect we are deeply abnormal and unrepresentative people. The fact that we're sitting here at 2 o'clock in the morning discussing a by-election which we're still waiting for in Brent East. And that means that people are not going to take the perspective, the argument that you've just made, well, I'm not going to take any lessons from you, Theresa May, because of what the Tories did umpteen years ago. They're going to say, what's happening at my school now? Teachers are being laid off. They're going to blame you. You're the Labour government. And those people are being laid off for whatever reason on your watch.
Look, I've come this evening from a celebration at one of our local schools, celebrating the success of those children in their Key Stage 3 in SATs. And that is all part of the improvement that's going on. People know that educational standards are rising, that more children are doing better, and that more pupils are moving on to higher education, and we are increasing that. There are difficulties, there are difficult problems, and one of those is to do obviously with the funding of higher education. And we know that these are tough choices that have to be made, and we're a government that's determined to face those, not to offer the soft option that the Liberal Democrats do, or the Tory pretense that somehow they can cut tax by 20% and deliver public services when
Nick,
everyone knows they can't.
Nick, the soft option you talked about on tuition fees is something that Labour in Scotland agrees with us on. Liberal Democrats have worked with Labour in Scotland to get rid of tuition fees.
Who allowed the Scots to act differently by giving them devolution?
That was a joint agreement with ourselves, but if you can get rid of
tuition fees... You say you've got rid of tuition fees, actually you haven't, because graduates have to pay after when they graduate, so they're still actually paying. And this is the proposal that it's a totally different thing, so if you pay up front it's one thing, and if you pay after the event, you're still paying. The only party that is actually going to scrap tuition fees is the Conservative Party.
And stop people going to university.
By reducing opportunity for people to go into higher education. It's one of the most regressive policies we've heard in education for decades. It's right back to the 1920s approach that people from disadvantaged homes can better act as plumbers rather than going into higher education. I've heard that nonsense from the Conservative Party, and I think it is appalling.
Is going to help people from disadvantaged families? Of course it isn't. What we are seeing, you said there were tough choices in higher education.
Very tough choices.
The tough choice is going to be taken by those parents and students who are going to feel they can't afford to go to university because of the tuition fees and top-up fees the Labour government is bringing in. That's the tough choice you're facing.
Who will not have to pay.
We want young people
who will not have to pay until they have completed their course, when, as we all know, the graduates have substantially higher earnings on average than others, and it is right and reasonable that they should make a contribution. But that's going to be
education is purely utilitarian. There is no good to society.
No, it is right. It is right that people should have that opportunity, and your party are trying to deny them by reducing the number of people going into higher education.
What we're trying to do is make sure that young people are selected for university on merit
just closing doors on talent.
Just very quickly, Nick Raynsford, aren't you? Why haven't you convinced all your MPs about this? There are as many Labour MPs who think this is an appalling idea.
Well, it's a very difficult issue.
Are you going to win the vote?
It's a very difficult issue, and I'm sure we'll win the vote, because ultimately people want to see increased investment in higher education. They want to see more people given the opportunity of succeeding, and they want a fair system that helps those on low incomes by removing fees from them, but also making it possible for others to pay over a period of time after they've graduated out of the higher income levels that they will get as a result of their qualifications. That is a basically sound policy. There's some detail to be worked on. There are unhappiness, I know, about some aspects of it, but it's a serious, responsible policy by a government that wants to produce results, not just produce rhetoric.
All right. Well, let's get back down to Brent Town Hall, because we're trying to find out when this result is going to come. We were told 1 o'clock, Reeta Chakrabarti.
Well, don't talk to me as if I'm the guilty party in this.
I blame you. We blame you here.
That's deeply unfair. I'm not going to admit to anything here. Well, look, we are, John, getting to the closing stages, I think. You can probably see the counters are still hard at work, but they're down to the minor parties now, if you like. And I don't know if you can see over there, but there are all the papers sort of lined up, tantalising prospect, exactly what they say. But if we believe the Liberal Democrats, and in fact if we believe all the main three parties, the Liberal Democrats have got this seat, an absolutely astounding result for them, and a very bad night for Labour and for the Conservatives, who will have been pushed into third place.
Is the returning officer giving us any indication of how much work there is still left to do? Because presumably there can't be a question of sort of lost deposits for either of the three main parties, and I would imagine that no one else is going to come close to saving their deposit.
I think that's absolutely right, yes. We know that there's been a turnout of about 36%, so that means about 20,000 votes. What will be intriguing now will be to see quite what the swing is to the Liberal Democrats if, as we think, they have won this seat. It will have to have been at least 26%, but could be even higher, and they are of course now coming out with figures showing this is their best result, or will be their best result if they have taken the seat in 10 years. But we will have to wait a little bit longer, John. I was told 5 minutes ago that it would be 20 minutes, so I hope I'm right.
We're going to hold you to account for that, Reeta Chakrabarti. We want to see that result by 2:15 or 2:20. Just very quickly, while we've got
I'll do my best.
Thank you. Just while we've got you there, I mean, going around, Brent, we've been sort of debating endlessly in the studio to what extent this is massive support for the Liberal Democrats and to what extent it is disaffection with the government. How would you read it?
It is very hard to say, of course, John, but just looking at the sort of area that this is not natural Liberal Democrat territory, if you like. They don't have a single councillor in Brent East, and that would lead one to believe that they don't really have much of a natural power base here. What they have been able to do, and this has been said several times during the programme, they have been able to absolutely pour resources into this area. Charles Kennedy has been here, I think it's 8 times in the last couple of weeks, and really targeted it. That's something that they can't do in the same way during a general election. So my feeling would be that it is about unpopularity with the government, about disaffection with the government, rather than necessarily a simple huge surge in support for the Liberal Democrats. But the other big question, of course, is why have the Conservatives, if they have come third as we believe they have, why have they simply failed to reap any of the benefits from that unpopularity that the government is suffering?
Okay, Reeta, can you really promise me something? If it goes on beyond 2:30 and you're wrong about the timing, will you put on one of those hats behind you worn by some of the fringe candidates?
No, I never make rash promises, John, so I'm glad to be able to stick by my principles here.
Okay, Reeta, thank you very much indeed. I think Reeta could be a politician there to discuss the by-election which is unfolding rather slowly in Brent Town Hall. Nick Raynsford, local government minister, Theresa May, the Tory party chairwoman, and Ed Davey from the Liberal Democrats. All of you, thank you for putting up with this late hour, 2:10. And it's still going to be a few minutes yet, we understand, before we're going to get a result. I've just been, it's been in the news for weeks and weeks now about the Hutton inquiry. Is it playing politically, do you think, Theresa May?
Well, I think obviously there is an issue that is coming out about trust in government from the Hutton inquiry in terms of where people are seeing what government does with information. And there are very real questions about how the government presented information in the period leading up to the Iraq war. But certainly from our point of view, we felt that this is not something that should be just bandied about as a party political issue. Lord Hutton was asked to inquire. We called for a full judicial inquiry, and indeed we have recently said that we would prefer his inquiry to be opened up again into a full judicial inquiry.
But it has been a remarkable inquiry nonetheless.
It has been a remarkable inquiry. Obviously we wait to see what he will be reporting on it. I believe he probably won't be reporting until after the party conference season has finished. And I think there are some very real questions to be answered in it. But I think it is right that one of the issue that is coming out, I think, is one that feeds into people's attitude to government from other issues because of government's failure to deliver in public services, which is this whole question of trust in government. Yeah. And there's that real lack of trust now with this government.
Nick Raynsford, aren't you reaping what you've sown in a way? Because in the run-up to the 97 election, it was all Tory sleaze and the Tories and their fat cats with their snouts in the trough and all the rest of it, and you made merry with all of that. And that led to a certain diminishing of trust in the Conservative Party, and now the same thing is coming back to haunt you. Not identical, but the whole spin culture. Do you think there is a real problem? And we've talked about turnout this evening in this by-election with sort of almost commenting that it's quite good that it's 36%. And yet, you know, that is all part of the diminution of trust held by the electorate in our elected politicians.
I think there's no question that there is a real issue about people's disappointment in politics and politicians, disengagement in the political process, and unwillingness to participate in the way that they used to 30, 40 years ago, when you saw much higher levels of turnout in elections, whether local elections or national. And we've got to address that, and it's a very, very serious issue indeed. There is a separate issue about the Hutton inquiry, which is very much, in my view, something which is preoccupying those people fascinated in the Westminster village, whether it's in the media or in Parliament. But the vast majority of people I talk to, whether in my own constituency or elsewhere in the country, are not hugely interested in what's going on, the minutiae. They want actually to see delivery of services, and they want to see improvement in public services. And it's those things they want to see us as politicians concentrating on.
Of course, but they may not be concentrating on the minutiae, but don't you think they're coming away with that sort of slight whiff of something unpleasant that's been passed under their nose? I don't like the smell of any of this, I don't trust any of them, and whether it be you or whether it be maybe, you know, we've taken a hit as well in the media about the level of trust that we can have. And that is, you know, something that has to be rebuilt, but partially...
I think there are two sides to this. You're quite right, and there's no question that your bulletin this evening features questions as to whether Andrew Gilligan might have not acted entirely properly with his transcripts and so forth. And so other institutions also are put under the spotlight. I think what we've also got to recognise is that what Lord Hutton is doing is a very remarkable, very detailed scrutiny of the high level of politics in this country. And in many, many other countries, that would never, ever happen. People would not allow that degree of scrutiny and that degree of openness. And I think it is to the credit of the British government that we are having this inquiry. It's going to produce some uncomfortable facts, no question, whether it's to the BBC, whether it's to the government, whether it's to others. But the important thing is we're seen to be an open society that wants to get to the bottom, to find out really what went wrong, and then make sure it doesn't happen again.
Ed Davey, do you find that there's something corrosive about the charges, the slapstick charges that are made about you're corrupt, you're sleazy, you're this, you're that, and it just doesn't actually, it's a zero-sum game where it ends up with all sides losing and just respect for the political process dwindling?
Yeah, I think so, and actually I think the media has got a lot to answer for, and the politicians are to a certain extent playing to the media's game, because the media like that sort of story. They feel it's easy to report and they can get it over with photographs and headlines and, you know, news scandal. And the media actually don't report some of the real policy issues. It's quite frustrating for politicians. And I think the danger is politicians have actually got to have a self-denying ordinance. They've got to sort of say, we're not going to get involved in that knockabout game. We're not going to get involved in that yaboo politics. And I'll show you how difficult it is. When Charles Kennedy stands at a parliamentary Prime Minister's question time each week, he tries not to do that. He says his question straight. He doesn't get involved in the vast hyperbole that you hear from some of the others. And some people say he's not fighting his corner. But he's just asking straight questions. He doesn't want to get involved in the yaboo politics. He wants a tone of politics which moves away from the scandal and the sleaze. And I think we need many more politicians to follow his lead.
Theresa May, what do you think of that? Because I sit and watch Prime Minister's questions, and I'm not based at Westminster anymore, but I sit and watch it because I still find it riveting, and I just wait for that moment where Ian Duncan Smith is going to say, and you can't believe a word he says.
Well, that's what people on the doorstep are saying to me about the government. I have to tell you, John, it's not just a phrase that's used in the House of Commons.
But the accusation I'm making is that the Labour led to, you know, all Tories were sleazy before the last general election. Now yours, you can't believe a word they're saying. And that just debases the political currency so that people come away with a feeling that I don't trust any of them.
Well, I think that what has debased the currency is the culture of spin that we've seen at the heart of the Labour government. And that is what has turned people off trusting government. And you're right, there is a problem in terms of trusting politicians as a whole. And it has come out of that belief that what people have seen is this culture of spin. And everybody said recently, oh, Alistair Campbell has gone from number 10, therefore the culture of spin will stop. And we've, the Prime Minister, I think, is saying things like he's going to change his style and the number 10 communications will be changed and so forth, and I'm sure they'll be relaunched. He'll relaunch himself at the Labour Party conference. But actually, that culture of spin is right through this Labour government, and Tony Blair is at its heart.
Spin and presentation has been part of government for years. Bernard Ingham, Margaret Thatcher's press person, published a book. He called it The Wages of Spin. He was doing it, and Tory governments have done it. And the important issue is that we should be serious about presentation in a way that presents what is happening and doesn't try to distort or conceal the reality of politics. And Ed's right, and we have, I think, a duty to ensure that we are much more serious about presenting facts and the real essence of arguments for political debate, rather than getting into either the yaboo or the personalised attacks, which actually do damage to the whole political process, frankly.
Okay, but do you accept then, if you don't want to get into the yaboo, that maybe Labour have overspun? That there have been times when policy announcements have been made and you think, well, is this a new policy announcement, or is this something that we already knew but has been slightly reheated or presented in a different way? Would you accept that perhaps you have been almost tried to be too clever by half in your, I don't want to use the word manipulation because it sounds pejorative, but your handling of the media?
Well, I would accept that has happened at times. There's no question about that. It's happened with our government, it's happened with other governments. But can I just put to you an issue that I was looking at today in my ministerial role, where there was a question of making a further announcement about some spending, which partly related to announcements that had already been made. And that often happens when you're bringing together a number of streams. And you have to work out how you present this in the most honest way that doesn't try and take credit for an announcement. Yes, yeah. Genuinely. So, and I have tried to do that. And I've tried to present it, and I've written to Ed. He'll get a letter from me tomorrow on this, and to David Davis on the Tory side to present this. Because I think it's right that we should, and we should be open, and we should try and present facts and figures in a serious and proper way. But there are always difficulties.
Well, did you think that things did get out of hand slightly in Downing Street, in the way that there was an obsession with spin, that everything could be manipulated, tweaked, managed, so that you should get...
I don't think things got out of hand, but I think there was a tendency when we came into government to believe that the same preoccupation, which was entirely understandable, because the Labour Party had been crucified by the media during the 1980s, and I lived through that period, and we were constantly on the defensive, running from a vicious media attack. You'll remember the Sun's headline in the 1992 general election.
Last person in Britain turned out the lights.
Exactly. Against that kind of constant denigration, we had to improve our act. We became more skillful at presentation, at putting our case across. And I think when we moved into government, we didn't realise that was an opposition tactic, and it was necessary to change the game a bit. And there is a modulation in terms of presentation between opposition and government, and I think we probably were slow to learn that.
Theresa May, have we got a repentant sinner here?
Well, it sounds certainly as if what Nick is saying is that he does accept that actually the spin has gone too far. And it is true that what has happened is that people do look at all politicians and fear that and tar us with the same brush. And there is a real challenge to us as political parties and as politicians to actually be sure that when we do present information and when we do present debates, we do present them in a way that makes the debate actually clear to people so they can honestly see what the issues are. And everybody is going to try, obviously, and present their arguments in the best way they can. That's nothing that's confined to politics. I'm sure when you're arguing a case inside the BBC, John, you probably present your argument as best you can. But there is a very real difference between that and a spin which takes reality and changes it and reports it as something different. And certainly I think we do have to, if we're going to encourage people to have trust in politics as a whole, we have got to meet that challenge.
But just look at the figures. 1992, 77.7% turnout. 1997, 71.4% turnout. 2001, 59.4%.
Yes.
I mean, it is a staggering decline. And you look, and it looks like it hasn't reached the bottom. It looks like it's still going to go down.
Well, I think, well, obviously the test of that will be when we come to the next general election. I think part of it is about this issue of people's approach to politicians and their views about politicians. And as I say, there is a great deal that we all need to be doing. I think also, actually, in 2001, a lot of people felt that coming up to the election, the general election result probably was in no doubt, and therefore there was a certain feeling that they didn't bother to go and vote because they felt it wasn't actually going to make a difference. And I think there is a real need in, for example, local government elections, where we see very low turnouts, to be able to show people, by ensuring that local government is not simply circumscribed by central government as to what it does and has too much of its money ring-fenced and so forth, but actually has the freedoms and responsibilities and power to do what they believe is right for the local community. I think if we can get to that stage too, we'll see people feeling their vote at local level can really make a difference.
Could it be something to do with what Ed Davey was saying earlier, that the Cold War has gone, the old ideological rigidities have gone, the old-fashioned class definitions that if you were working class you'd vote Labour and if you were middle class you'd vote Conservative, that's all gone as well. And then actually people look at the Tory programme or the Labour programme and think, well, there are differences, but there is not a fun programme. Yes, but I'm talking about the old left-right divide. I'm talking about the traditional left-right divide. I wasn't trying to exclude the Liberal Democrat, but just thinking that actually the old polar differences are no longer there. They're all managerial parties now. Who's going to manage it better?
Well, I think what is certainly the case is that we have seen the electorate changing. That in the days when I started in politics, you could reckon that a very significant number of voters had a sort of tribal loyalty to one of the parties, that perhaps they'd been brought up in a Conservative household and they were carrying on voting Conservative, or they had always voted Labour, their parents had voted Labour and they continued to do that. But that has changed. Voters are looking more for what government and what politicians will deliver for them. It's not just about that sort of long-standing, lifelong membership of or support of a particular political party. And that means that the politicians we have to work harder in showing people actually that what we were doing will make a difference to their lives. And that's the key thing, them actually recognising the difference that different politicians can make. I would argue that actually that there is a very real difference between us and the Labour government, and as seen by the document we produced last week, which shows that it's their centralising approach that is actually meant that they're not able to deliver on the public services.
It's a great shame, Theresa, you weren't in the House last night when both Ed and I were, and I actually quoted it back to your frontbench spokesman who didn't recognise it and was arguing exactly the opposite. So I have to say, you've got a long way to go in terms of your policies.
Absolutely. Right, OK, we're going to go out back to Brent now. Brent Town Hall, Reeta Chakrabarti is there waiting for us. I've said that, I think, only 15 times this evening. Reeta, how are we doing?
Well, what can I say, John? No end just yet, but we have turned the camera shot around so that you see the podium, the platform from which the announcement will be made to heighten that sense of it being about to happen. The counters seem to be checking the votes rather than actually counting them. But before we get a declaration, the returning officer will call the party agents, and he hasn't done that yet. So it is going to be at least another 10-15 minutes. But it does look still as if it's going to be the Liberal Democrats' big night. Their leader, Charles Kennedy, has of course been in this constituency several times over the past couple of weeks. I think 8 visits were counted. The Lib Dems have really poured all their resources into this campaign, and it does look as if they will be reaping the benefits. Well, to muse about that and other things, I'm joined again by Simon Hughes, the Liberal Democrat MP for Bermondsey. Simon Hughes, if we could indulge in a little sweet nostalgia for a moment, couldn't we? Because you yourself were the happy beneficiary of a very big swing, weren't you? Remind us what happened.
Yes, it was quite a long time ago. It was 20 years ago this year. It was a seat Labour had held like this for many years. It was a time when the Labour Party locally and nationally weren't popular, and the voters came to us. And it was exactly this sort of time. It was another count which went on and went on. And the agents are now being called.
The agents are being called.
So we're within sight of the line now. And it was at just the moment like this that people suddenly realised the result might change history. It changed history a bit when Bermondsey was won, when Greenwich was won. It only moves it a bit, but it moves it in a way you can never undo. And that's what will be the significance tonight. If we win tonight, as it looks as if we now may, I think the swing will be 30%. I've just been sitting at the table doing my figures. That is one of the biggest swings against any party holding a seat in your lifetime and in mine.
No one will take that victory away from you if you do indeed get it. But of course what people will ask will be, is this just a blip? Is this something the Liberal Democrats can only do during a by-election and not in a general election? That's the big question.
Well, that's one of the questions, perfectly reasonably asked. And the twin answer to that is we hold now many of the seats we win in by-elections, and one of the bits of living proof, but there are many other colleagues too. But it's a consistent move upwards for us. We have the largest number of MPs we've had since the last war. We got 30% across the country, just the same as the Labour Party in the local elections in May. So it's not a one-off. This is a consistent pattern. Yes, of course, in this seat, it comes as a surprise. But we do now make inroads. And here, not just against Labour, against the Tories too, who were second, who nearly won the seat 15 years ago. They're completely out of the picture. So I think it's a trend. And the other message is, it's a message that shows the government is at last realised by the public to be in trouble.
But that may also be it, that this is a vote about the government's unpopularity and not really about you. It's more what it says about Labour than what it says about you.
Well, by-elections, Reeta, are two things. You don't change the government in a by-election, but you say what you think about the government. And you vote then for the party who you next prefer. You move your vote. And what people have done is said, look, we're not happy with the government. We're not happy with the government's foreign policy on Iraq. We're not happy with the government's domestic policy on public services. We're not happy with the Labour running this council, which is, to be honest, pretty filthy streets and the rest. But they're not turning to the major opposition party. The traditional major opposition party is not benefiting. Now, when I was a youngster and grew up, I remember there was a great by-election in Ashfield, a mining town. It always been Labour. Labour were in government. The Tories won the seat. They're nowhere here. So things have changed. The last 25 years, seeing Liberal Democrats taking over the role of being the challenger to be the opposition. Charles Kennedy's always said, our job is to overtake the Tories and then become the next government. All I know is that tonight sees us overtaking the Tories and moving a pretty significant step forward towards being the next government when people throw this Labour government out.
But you will have been surprised by this result, won't you? At the beginning of this evening, you didn't really come here thinking you were going to win, did you?
No, I thought we'd probably be a couple of thousand adrift, and that's honest. I shared with you and colleagues. I'm always cautious about these things. Even in my own by-election, which I won with a majority of over 9,000, I didn't really persuade myself till the night that we'd won. So it's better to be cautious, to be honest. There's no good coming and think we definitely won. But we worked hard, you're right. Charles has been often, we've all been often. We have Chris Rennard, who's an excellent campaign director. We had a very good candidate. And the good news for the public is we have somebody who'll be the youngest MP. We have another woman in Parliament, and that's very, very important because women are hugely underrepresented. And for us, in a seat that is the mix of Britain, a phenomenally interesting mixed community. Lots of Irish people and Africans and Indians and people from Scotland and the rest of the UK. Really interesting seat. So here we are in a sort of crux, a kernel seat in London. And I think it sends a very significant... There will be huge interest in the Labour Party after this. And the Tory Party too will say, where's our support gone? So it is a significant moment. Of course, if the Labour government changed its policies, if it changed its policy home and abroad, then it could recover. Of course it could. And the next general election, you elect a government, you don't pass judgment on the government. So of course I'm not pretending that suddenly we take over the government. But you can never undo a by-election. And more by-election winners hold their seats now. They're less flash in the pans. And I think Sarah will be a very good MP and is likely to be here for a very long time.
You say they're less flash in the pans, but on the whole, people do still feel a little freer to roam during a by-election, don't they?
And that's why the so-called fringe parties will have done better than they would in a general election.
But so will you, by extension, have done better than you would?
Well, I'm not sure about that, in the sense that, of course, in a by-election, that the interest is concentrated. And yes, there's a bigger protest against the government. But the interesting thing is that they came to us. That's the interesting thing. They didn't go to the party that has traditionally challenged in this seat. They didn't vote for a woman who is a councillor in this borough. They decided, and who called herself the local Conservative candidate, not the Conservative Party candidate, they decided to come to us. That's because we are now a more credible party. It's because we were talking, I was doing it myself, about post offices down the road in a place called Brondesbury, which is being closed, about the health service, which people are troubled about the quality of life here, about public transport. They're real issues. Add in discontent with the government abroad, and you get a potent mix, and the government would ignore this at their peril. Me, even Mr Campbell, would not spin them out of this one.
All right, Simon Hughes, we'll have to leave it there. I think we are on the way to getting the result. You heard just there, I think, the returning officer calling the agents to come and see him. So that usually is the sign that a result is imminent. So we hope to bring you that very soon.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Rita. We'll obviously be back there when it comes. Ed Davey, it just struck me, really, after however many hours we've been on air, 2 words I haven't heard pass a Liberal Democrat's lips this evening. A proportional representation. Have we forgotten about that now?
No.
Or are you just kind of using the present electoral system so well that you don't need to worry about it, and that actually the first past the post is serving you quite nicely at the moment?
No, I'll show you why we're still very committed to it. In Scotland, where we have some influence because we're part of the government in Scotland, we've persuaded our Labour coalition partners to look at single transferable vote, PR, in local elections. So where we've got power, we're actually trying to push the PR agenda. We've not forgotten it. It's still there. But it's quite right for us to talk about the other issues, about education, health and crime and transport. And as Simon was there, as Sarah Tether has done in this campaign. I think the British people want us to talk about those issues because they're the issues they care about, they're the issues they see Labour not delivering on.
I know it is a very considerable victory that looks like you will have achieved this evening. So. Wasn't Simon Hughes just going maybe a tiny bit over the top about the significance of it?
No, I don't think so, because it's part of a pattern, it's part of a trend. And I think it's really interesting that you got Simon on the programme tonight in Brent East, Ken Livingstone's old seat, because next year we've got the mayoral elections. Here we have the Liberal Democrats beating Labour, beating Ken Livingstone. He was there on the leaflets with the Labour candidate in the last few days, beating Ken Livingstone in his own backyard. Maybe this is a presage for next year when Simon, I think, has the best chance of any candidate of beating Ken Livingstone and actually getting some sense and value for money into London government. So imagine if we did that. Imagine if Simon won the mayoral campaign, won the majority of the votes in London. Imagine if we start taking back some of these northern cities. This is the trend the Liberal Democrats are on.
Theresa May, I saw you shaking your head.
It's a trend that the Conservatives have clearly showed tonight. Have clearly showed tonight they're not capable of doing. The Tories have gone back into third place tonight. It's a disastrous night for them, and at the moment they're going absolutely nowhere.
It is not a disastrous night for the Conservative Party. But what
is it a good night?
Clear is the trends that you're talking about, Ed. Let's talk about some of the trends. If you look at the pattern of Liberal Democrat victories, actually, albeit in either by-elections for parliamentary seats or indeed in council elections, what you actually see is the Liberal Democrats are very good at fighting a campaign and getting that single victory that gets them that headline. But then, a little way down the line, actually, once they've been there, all too often they actually then find themselves losing that seat, or particularly in councils, they'll be in for a few years, people will see actually that they're pretty reckless with the spending, and then we'll vote them out again. Well, I mean, we've already heard examples tonight like Sheffield and other examples.
Many examples which go completely against.
And how about Richmond upon Thames, right next door to you, Ed?
We were
Thames?
there 18 years.
Ed, let me just present one very simple and rather incontrovertible fact. The last time the Liberal Party or SDP won a seat from Labour was in Greenwich in 1987.
Let me just stop you. Let me go over to Brent, because there's a man standing at a microphone. Or is it a full stall? Hang on, let's see. Here comes the mayor. I think we may be getting a declaration.
Oh, hallelujah.
They think it's all over. It is now.
Good morning, everybody. It's been a long night, but welcome to Brent Town Hall. You've had time, I hope, to look out at the back there across to the illuminated cranes of our rapidly rising National Stadium. It's the centrepiece of our regeneration in Wembley, and we're very proud of it. But I think you've come here for some other reason, yes. So we go on now to the formal business and the result of the by-election. I, Charles Peter Lemon, Mayor of the London Borough of Brent and returning officer for the parliamentary constituency of Brent East, do hereby give notice that the number of votes cast for each candidate was as follows. Bardwaj Jiden, 35. Barshak Aaron Alexander, 37.
More cuts for hairdressers.
Butterworth Brian, 361. Creamer Iris Mary Jessie, 111. Evans Robert John Emlyn, 7,040 votes. Fernandes Uma Nalaini, 3,368 votes. Paul Brian John, 140. Hope Alan, 59. Ibrahim Kidori Forsi, 219 votes. Emmanuel Harold Leon, 188 votes. Lynch Noel Thomas, 638 votes. McBride Kelly, 189 votes. Mackenzie Winston Truman, 197 votes. Tether Sarah Louise, 8,158 votes. $8,158. Walsh Neil Francis, 101. Weiss Rainbow George, 11. And amazingly, not surprisingly, with 16 candidates, Spoilt Papers, 109. I hereby declare that Sarah Louise Tether is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Brent East constituency.
Okay, a majority of 1,118 for Sarah Tether on a massive swing. She's now going up to the platform herself to presumably take the microphone, thank the returning officer as the new MP for Brent East.
I want to thank the people of Brent East for voting for me today and for electing me as their Member of Parliament. It will be a huge privilege to serve them. Brent is an extraordinary place. It is the most ethnically diverse constituency in the country. It is a place of great vibrancy, a place of many cultures, but it is also a place of great need. And it is a place that has been failed by the Labour government and the Labour Council. Now, today's election has a message for all parties. Tony Blair, I hope that you are listening tonight. The people of Brent have spoken for the people of Britain. They want you to listen. They want you to deliver. But there is no comfort in this result tonight for the Conservative Party. They're irrelevant to constituencies like this. The tide may be turning against Tony Blair and New Labour, but the tide remains far out for the Conservatives in this country. But Charles Kennedy, I want to thank Charles Kennedy personally. He's visited this constituency so many times, he has practically made it his second home over the last 2 months. Tonight's result is a vindication of the courageous stance that Charles Kennedy took on issues such as Iraq, but also health and schools. We have demonstrated as a party that we are the effective opposition in Parliament, and today we have demonstrated that we are the only party in inner city London who can beat the Labour Party. But there is somebody who I would like to pay tribute to. I would like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Paul Daisley. Mr. Daisley died in tragic circumstances. He was a sincere man and a hard-working man, and I hope that I can be a worthy successor to him. And I hope that I will be able to represent this constituency, regardless of who voted what way. I want to thank the returning officer and his staff, for the police, but most of all, I want to thank my agent, Victoria Marsom.
And a very happy Sarah Tether there, having won the constituency of Brent East with a majority of 1,118 there on a turnout. Let's just give you those figures up on the screen if we can. There you see it. The Liberal Democrats, 8,158 votes for Sarah Tether. Robert Evans, the Labour candidate, with 7,040, and Uma Fernandes, the Conservative, with 3,368. So Tories pushed into third place. Labour lose one of their safest seats in the country. Reeta Chakrabarti at Brent Town Hall. Those speeches, I suspect, are going to go on for some time. Let me get your thoughts on this result.
Well, you can probably hear just all around me Liberal Democrats making a noise out of all proportion to their numbers. I must say they're absolutely elated here. We estimate that this result means a swing of 29% to the Liberal Democrats, which is something that I think was actually beyond their wildest dreams. Even though they were talking very hopefully about their chances, I think a lot of them really felt that the best they could do would be to cut Labour's majority quite in a healthy way, but they've done absolutely fantastically well. It's impossible to take that away from them, and I think the analysis now is going to be quite what happened to the Labour vote and to the Conservative vote, of course. You saw a very glum-looking Robert Evans, the Labour candidate, standing there. He didn't expect this. He is the Labour MEP, the European Member of Parliament for this area. As such, he is known here. And I think, there will be a great deal of post-morteming, if you like, about exactly what happened. Immediate thoughts are that it was, in fact, a backlash, a mid-term backlash, but a lot of this will be under discussion. As for the Conservatives, this was certainly never fertile territory for them, but
Reeta,
they have come a very bad third place.
Reeta, there she is. Get some
Jon,
words with
exactly, her. Yes. Just, yeah, indeed. Sarah Tether, you look absolutely elated.
I am absolutely elated. It's an extraordinary result. I mean, when you think that we've come from third place with only 3,000 votes, to win tonight with such a huge majority. It is an extraordinary result.
Did you expect to win tonight?
Every candidate dreams of winning.
Expect to win.
We noticed that the tide was turning with us, in the last 6 weeks or so. There's such a clear lack of trust in Tony Blair. And the war has played a very major part in this campaign. But it's not just the war. People don't believe a word that Tony Blair says anymore on schools or hospitals or anything. And they were looking for an alternative. We fought a very positive campaign on local issues, on national issues and international issues. And the support has almost overwhelmed me in the last month or so we began to get that feeling that we could do it tonight.
You have secured a stunning victory here tonight. What on the doorstep do you think was best for you? Was it local issues or was it government unpopularity?
It was all of those issues. When you look around this constituency, there's graffiti everywhere, there's rubbish everywhere, and it's a kind of backdrop of neglect, the sense that this area has been forgotten in some way. But issues to do with local schools and hospitals also played a very big part, and of course the war in Iraq.
And here you are, a new Member of Parliament, the youngest Member of Parliament. What will this hold for you?
Well, I hope that I'll be able to serve the people of Brent to the best of my ability, and I guess work starts tomorrow.
Indeed. This is, of course, a huge upset with the first by-election defeat for Labour in 15 years. Looking back at the campaign, what do you think swung it for you?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, it's a mixture of local issues, of national issues and of international issues. I think all of those were very important. And the fact that we ran a very positive campaign, talking about the things that we were hoping to achieve here. And I think people responded to that very well.
You, as a party, you've thrown a huge amount of resources into this campaign, but now, in a sense, as you said, the more sober work starts of being the third party in Westminster. That is different, isn't it, translating this undoubtedly terrific victory for you into something more sustained?
Well, it bodes well for the future. I mean, of course, Simon Hughes is with me tonight, and Simon has a very important election next year in the mayoral election. We mustn't forget that this was Ken Livingstone's old seat, and Ken Livingstone backed the Labour candidate. I think this is also a rejection of him.
And what will be your priorities now then as the new MP for Brent East?
My first priority is to open an office here and to set regular surgery times so that people can find me accessible. And I've campaigned here to try and clean up the area, and I will continue that campaign to try and make the council realise that people are not happy with the state of the roads and the state of the local area. And I'll be campaigning in Parliament to ensure that more money goes into local schools and local hospitals.
And on a lighter note, what are you going to go off and do now?
Well, I believe that I have rather more media interviews to go. And then
surely something a bit more fun.
Charles Kennedy is going to be coming into our headquarters later on this evening, and I'll be going back to celebrate with all the people who've worked so hard for me to make this victory possible.
All right, Sarah Tether, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, a very, very happy new MP here. Sarah Tether, back to you in the studio, John.
Thank you very much indeed. And when she says later this evening, I think she means later this morning, as it is now nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. Let's get political reaction from round the table to this result. Ed, I'm going to come to you last, because I'm sure you're going to say it's fantastic. And
my smile will still be there.
Your smile will still be there. Nick Raynsford, it was one of the safest seats in the country. You had a 13,000 majority. It's a horrible result for you, isn't it?
It's not a good result at all, no. I accepted that earlier on. It was likely to be a bad result. It is a bad result. We've got lessons to learn from it. But I think there is something that should be put in context. I was just about to say, before we broke in for the announcement of the result, that 15 years ago, the last time the Liberal Democrats, or their equivalent, won a seat from Labour was in Greenwich. And at that stage, they talked about how this was the breakthrough. Rosie Barnes was the great new candidate. They got a 25% swing. This was going to presage huge success for them. Well, 5 years later, Labour was back in Greenwich. I'm now the Member of Parliament for Greenwich. The Liberal Democrats didn't make the breakthrough, and I fear, although I don't want to take away from their victory tonight, I fear that we'll see exactly the same pattern.
I'm more interested in what you think the lessons you've got to learn from.
I think there are some very important lessons from this. The government has got to concentrate on the issues that the people are particularly concerned about, and that is very much domestic issues. They want to see us continuing to run the strong economy that we have, but they also want to see further improvements in public services. We're determined to do that, and I'm sure the government will be focusing on that over the next 2 years. And I'm sure that when we come to the general election, we will see a very different result to tonight.
There are a lot of people who talk about in politics, impressions, perception is everything. Labour suddenly looks vulnerable. It has been an invincible political machine in terms of winning elections, by-elections, for about the last 15 years. I don't think it's lost a by-election in 15 years. This is the first by-election you've lost since Glasgow Govan, when I think Jim Sillars took it all those years ago. Isn't the perception that people are going to come away from that you are now fragile?
I don't think they'll see us as fragile. I think they'll see us as capable of actually losing, and that's probably a very healthy thing, because invincibility is not the real world. We've got lessons to learn from this. It's a bad result for us tonight, no question. But the party is strong. We have a large parliamentary majority. We are committed to continuing the programme of improving public services. That will be our priority over the next 2 years, and I'll give you a wager that we'll see a very different result when we get to the general election.
Theresa May, your vote may not have collapsed, but 3,368 votes pushed into a poor third place. Will you admit as well that this is a horrid night for the Tory party too?
I don't describe it as a horrid night for the Tory party, John, because
what
as I've been saying all along, well, as you say, our vote, contrary to predictions, I might say, and including early predictions I understand earlier tonight on the BBC, that our vote was going to completely collapse. It didn't completely collapse. I think there was the key thing that has come out of this by-election is that it's a massive blow to the Labour Party in its heartland. This is Labour heartland, it is core Labour territory. What we have seen is people who are natural Labour voters, wanting to deliver a message to Tony Blair that they didn't like what the government was doing, they didn't like his tax spend and fail policies and the way he's not delivering for them on public services. They looked for a party of the left to vote for and they voted for the Liberal Democrats.
I hope I've been extremely courteous in allowing you to make that rhetorical point, but what sort of evening has this been for the Conservative Party? Because you haven't won a by-election now since 1982. It's 21 and a half years. You're hoping you're going to form the next government at the next general election, and yet, on the evidence of tonight, you are going nowhere.
Well, if I could pick up what Nick Raynsford said at the end of his remarks, I think the key thing that everybody must take out from this is that actually, and indeed from what has happened in by-elections over previous years, is that you can't take a single by-election and say, well, that result is going to be replicated come a general election, either in terms of who wins the seat at a general election or in terms of the overall percentage vote that the parties get at the general election. That's what we've seen. We've seen a number of by-elections over the years where the Liberal Democrats have won. They've beaten us in the past. They've taken seats from us that we've then taken back at general elections. We saw in Christchurch in 1993, we saw Labour losing its deposit, but these are things that happen in by-elections.
Nick Raynsford had the humility to say that this is a very bad result for us. There are lessons to be learned from it. We've got to make progress on delivery and public services and all the other points that he made, and said it's been a torrid time because of the war. I haven't heard you concede to anything yet.
Well, what I have said, what
no substance.
No, what I will say, and I will repeat what I in fact said earlier, John, is that we don't look at a single by-election result and say that this is going to be what's replicated in a general election. We look at how the party is positioning itself overall in terms of the wider electorate. And yes, we're on a path that leads us to the...
Are you not even disappointed by tonight?
We're on a path that leads... Well, I'm disappointed for Uma Fernandes because I think she was an extremely good candidate. Do parties want to come third in elections? Of course, parties don't want to come third in elections. But our vote held up contrary to predictions that it was going to collapse. And what I'm saying now is that I'm not saying that this is a result that is going to be something that we look at and say, well, this is what's going to happen in a general election. I've already said that we will look at the campaign and learn the lessons from the campaign. But we are a party that is on course to the general election, and that is crucial. We don't just look at one by-election and say, we're gearing up and peaking for the by-election. We're actually looking at the longer term of the general election. And yes, the job that we have to do as a party is to show people that we are that credible alternative government. I believe we've started that job, and we will carry on doing that job.
Ed Davey, you promised you still have a smile on your face, and you've got rather a frown.
No, I was frowning at Theresa's comments. Now I can smile at them. The idea that she's celebrating coming third is just preposterous. It's a dreadful night for the Conservatives. They were really wanting to make sure we stayed in third, but we've not just leapt over them, we've leapt over Labour too. I mean, it's a stunning result for us, 29% swing in a safe area where we previously had no councillors. This is way beyond our expectations, way beyond the expectations that I had before I came here tonight. And you saw a very confident performance by Sarah Teller there on her first major a media interview after being elected. She's going to be a stunning MP for Brent East and for the Liberal Democrats, really going to strengthen our cause. And I must take issue with Nick. I mean, OK, he makes the parallel with Greenwich. I think the parallel just doesn't hold. This by-election success comes on the back of a real steady success over the years. The 1997 general election result, the 2001 general election result, which has given us more MPs than we've had since the 1920s. Then the 30% we got last May, record success in council elections across the country. This isn't just a blip, this is a trend, and the trend is continuing. We're going to be overtaking the Conservatives and nipping at the heels of Labour for government.
They said exactly the same in Greenwich.
No, we didn't.
They said exactly the same.
The reason why we couldn't say the same, Nick, is it wasn't a trend. This is a trend.
I heard exactly the same about all those by-election successes.
I must leave it there. It has been a spectacular Liberal Democrat victory tonight. What, of course, it signifies for the general election, well, as political correspondents always say at times like this, only time will tell. But it has been a night for the Conservatives where they haven't broken that record of 21 and a half years since they've won a by-election, and Labour have been shown that they are invincible in by-elections because they have lost for the first time since the Glasgow government by-election. But it will be the Liberal Democrats who will be celebrating tonight. Sarah Tether, the newest and the youngest MP at Westminster. From this BBC News special, a very good night to you.
Good morning. Of late, across England and Wales, we've really been spoilt by September sunshine. Most of us had a much cloudier day on Thursday, but where the sun came out, again it was pretty warm in Margate, 25 degrees Celsius with 11 hours of sunshine. More cloud elsewhere, and that cloud again producing some rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Port Ellen in the Inner Hebrides, the wettest place with just over a centimetre of rain. But 25 degrees Celsius is well above the average, as you can see, and I think we'll continue to beat those average temperatures as we go through the weekend. But again, today it'll be fairly cloudy. We've still got this weather front around, providing a little bit of rain at the moment across parts of northern England and North Wales. And that weather front doesn't really move very far through the day, so it'll keep a lot of cloud here, and that rain likely to pep up, especially if you go through the morning across North Wales. There's some quite heavy bursts of rain here, quite misty and murky up over the Cambrian Mountains. Later on in the day, some of that rain may be edging into southern parts of Wales, but I think the southeast should stay largely dry if fairly cloudy. A lot of cloud across England and Wales generally, some brighter spells in the southeast, some brighter spells developing across Scotland and Northern Ireland. A little bit of early morning mist and fog here maybe, and some thicker cloud across the far north of Scotland where it'll also be fairly windy, and that's spreading down some showery outbreaks of rain into western Scotland and Northern Ireland around the middle part of the day. Also, as the day goes on, that rain likely to turn more persistent across northern England, particularly I think Lancashire, Cheshire, large parts of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire may well have a fairly damp end to the day. The south stays dry with some sunny spells coming through, so you might catch a little bit if you're going to the races at Newbury. It should be fairly cloudy, but I'm hopeful it'll be dry at Nottingham, just the chance of a shower at Ayr. 17 Celsius here, peaking the temperatures again in that southeastern corner at 23 or 24. It'll probably feel a little bit chilly though at Knowsley Road, likely to be quite a damp day here, and still the chance of a little bit of that rain around for kick-off at 8 p.m. as the Saints take on the Bulls. The weather front sinks southwards though on Friday night and tends to fizzle out. Quite a bit of cloud I think still on that front across southern counties, but most places dry, a few showers coming into the far northeast, but most places having a fine day on Saturday. Not too bad on Sunday either, but this weather front will be pushing some rain across Northern Ireland for a time, edging into western parts of Scotland. The odd shower elsewhere, but most places dry. It certainly looks like being dry and largely fine for the Great North Run on Sunday morning. A mixture of sunshine and showers as we go into the new working week on Monday. That's it. Here's a summary.
It's Eusebio kicking off. Good early ball to Jon Sopel. Crosses it to Carlos Alberto. Neat touch by the Brazilian. Pumps it away downfield. This is Emil Heskey. Crosses to Eddie Newton. The crowd beginning to rise now. Alba Johansson. Typically fleet of foot the South African. Laurie Cunningham on the drive to Thierry Henry. The Matador's pirouette. Can he score? Henry scores for Arsenal!
BBC 4 celebrates 100 years of Black British football. Black Flash, Sunday at 7.
million homes without electricity as Hurricane Isabel batters the US East Coast. 7 states declare an emergency as the storm moves inland towards Washington, D.C. President Bush says Yasser Arafat is a failed leader who has stalled the peace process. Ambushed in the dark, 3 more US soldiers killed in another day of attacks on American forces in Iraq. And the modern face of India, how it's taking jobs from the prosperous West. This is BBC News. Welcome, I'm Alistair Yates. The full force of Hurricane Isabel